Chapter 1. Is it hot? Before Helene Vivian could recover from the joy of getting married, she was stopped in her tracks by the scene in front of her. The man she was about to marry was holding a young girl in his arms. That young girl was none other than her half-sister, Helene Jiao. Helene Jiao held the teacup. Her movements were very small as she shook her head. The crimson blush on her face was like an invisible ice needle, piercing Wei Wei's heart needle by needle. The unspeakable pain made Helene Vivian take a big step forward. Helene Jiao immediately shrunk her shoulders, her delicate little face showing fear. Her voice trembled as she called out, "Big sister, please listen to me. No need to explain." The man stood up. The side of his handsome face was indifferent. He lightly patted Helene Jiao's shoulder and said in a low voice, "There's nothing to explain to this evil woman." Helene Vivian's face suddenly turned white as she hurriedly took a step back. "Evil woman? Haha, you called me an evil woman?" She waited bitterly for him for 7 years, and this was the result she was waiting for? "You know what you've done." His tone was ice-cold and ruthless as he looked at her with eyes full of disgust. "I originally thought that you were only young and didn't know any better, but now it seems that's not the case. Even Jiao, such a kind person, you can even lay your hands on her. Helene Wei, your rude and unreasonable behavior should also end." Helene Jiao weakly pulled on the man's sleeve. "Lord, it is all Jiao's fault. Big sister loves you too much. That's why she treated Jiao like this. Jiao can bear it." She cried as she spoke, biting her thin lips, and her eyes were red, giving people a feeling of grievance. After seeing this scene, the man completely lost his patience. With a wave of his sleeve, he threw a piece of paper in Helene Vivian's face. There were only 2 big words written on the paper: "Divorce letter." Helene Vivian's hand suddenly trembled. Her eyes seemed to be stung by something, burning uncomfortably. However, the man didn't even look at her. He held Helene Jiao and walked in the direction of the study, as if the person standing behind him was not a person, but an animal. "Haha, so young Master Murong is here to deliver the divorce letter. I was wondering why he specially came to the front hall." Helene May, who always took pleasure in bullying Helene Vivian, walked over and reached out her hand to Helene Vivian's hand to take the divorce letter, her face full of schadenfreude. At this time, Helene Jiao, who had sent the man away, had already returned. She looked at the words on the paper, turned around and threw the paper at Wei Wei's face. Her other hand grabbed Wei Wei's hair and pulled hard. "Aren't you usually very arrogant? Let's see if you can be arrogant again." Helene Jiao, who was behind her, changed from her previous bashfulness. She pressed Helene Vivian's head and fiercely slammed it against the table. "Now that you've been divorced by the heir, I want to see if you can still be so arrogant, slut." "Sister Jiao, don't say so much to her. She's such a wishful-thinking slut who follows the heir around like a mangy dog. She should be properly taught a lesson. Let her know her place." "You're right," Helene Jiao sneered. She directly reached out her hand and pressed Helene Vivian into the water jar on the side. The water jar was full, and when it entered her nose, she felt a burst of discomfort. Helene Vivian struggled to get rid of their restraint, but she was not strong enough. Her whole body slipped and fell into the jar. Helene Jiao seemed to have not played enough. She grabbed Helene Vivian's hair and lifted her up, then continued to press her down. "You dare to fight with me? Why don't you take a look at yourself first? The heir has been sick of you for a long time, but you're still pestering him. You're really shameless." Helene Vivian felt a burst of pain where she was being held. It was burning as if her skin was peeling off. The ice-cold water choked into her mouth again and again. She coughed and struggled at the same time. She was in an extremely sorry state. Even her eyes were slowly losing their luster. Seeing this, Helene Jiao's eyes turned and a sinister plan floated in her mind. "Younger sister, let's throw this woman into the river. Just say that she saw the divorce letter and couldn't think straight and jumped into the river to commit suicide." The 2 people's voices became more and more distant. Then, there was a splash. A heavy object fell, and the clear water filled her ears. Finally, she did not have to listen to those piercing sounds anymore. But she was unwilling. If someone could take back everything that belonged to her for her, She was willing to give up everything she had. Hellion Vivian's eyes could not focus as she looked at the dark sky. The tears overflowing from the corners of her eyes seemed to be knocking on a door that did not belong to this world. The pain spread throughout her body. The faint sound of crying pulled Hellion Vivian out of the darkness. She had just opened her eyes when she was stunned by the scene in front of her. There was a small bridge, flowing water, ancient pavilions, and winding corridors. There was a mama wearing an ancient costume kneeling beside her. When she saw that she had woken up, she immediately stopped crying and smiled, as if she was finally relieved. Hellion Vivian looked at her motionlessly. For a moment, her expression became even more absent-minded. When the mama saw her like this, the smile on her face disappeared and was replaced by nervousness and worry. "Young miss, what happened to you? Are you still feeling unwell?" Hellion Vivian did not speak and seemed to be quiet for a moment. In a flash, a cold light suddenly appeared in her eyes as she looked straight at that mama. "Young." The mama trembled under Hellion Vivian's gaze. Her originally nimble words also trembled. "Young miss, nothing can happen to you. What should we do? What should we do? This old servant will go to the study and beg the master right now. You are the only descendant of the Hellion family. Even if he is not a good person, he can't repay kindness with enmity to this extent." "Master? Repay kindness with enmity?" Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. Was this person fooling her? Who had the guts to fool her, the mercenary queen, simply courting death? Hellion Vivian moved. Just as she was about to stand up, suddenly, one image after another appeared in her mind. The amount of information was so large that it almost made her violently dizzy. Those were memories that belonged to another person. From the time when she was just learning to speak to the time when she was a 15-year-old little girl, black and white were reversed, incomparably chaotic. For Hellion Vivian, a completely unfamiliar world opened up. This was an ancient world that was completely different from the 21st century. This was a world that was truly ruled by the emperor. In this world, martial arts were respected. Whoever had the hardest fist had the right to speak. As the mercenary queen who aspired to the top of the world, Hellion Vivian simply did not dare to believe. She had only slept for a while and was actually inexplicably reborn into such an underage body. Chapter 2. What made Hellion Vivian not know whether to laugh or cry was that this was a dynasty without any historical records. War Dragon Empire. And the owner of her body was the eldest daughter of the Hellion family, one of the 4 great families of the War Dragon Empire, who had the same name as her. Originally, she had a very powerful identity and could walk sideways in the entire capital. However, after her biological father's grandfather passed away, he immediately married into the second branch. He had long forgotten the promise he made when he married into the Hellion family. He said that he would never disappoint her mother. Otherwise, he would be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. That second branch wept endlessly and told everyone that her mother's tolerance was small and couldn't tolerate her. However, that year, her mother's illness was so serious that she couldn't get out of bed. In the end, she died of depression. A generation of family property fell into the hands of an outsider. The original owner was young and couldn't distinguish between good and evil. Even more, she couldn't see through the deception in this big house. She felt that the second branch had never beaten or scolded her. It was for her own good. Little did she know that there was a most insidious method in this world: killing by flattery. After the second branch took over the rear house, they took care of her and turned her into an arrogant and willful eldest daughter who didn't know anything. They let her cause trouble. In the end, when others saw her, their first reaction was disgust. They disliked her temperament and even more disliked her dark face. They said that she was a toad who wanted to eat swan meat. Now, she was afraid that even her marriage would fall on that half-sister of hers, because everyone thought that she, who was boorish and arrogant, bullied Hellion Jiaoer. It was really a good show of a scum father and a cheap daughter. If it weren't for her vicious stepmother and sister, she wouldn't have lost all her martial chi and become a love-struck trash that everyone disliked. Oh, love-struck? Trash? These 2 words had never belonged to her. "I'm fine." Hellion Vivian pulled the mama who wanted to leave. Her voice was hoarse, and hid an invisible pressure. After so many years of experience, she had long been trained to be able to quickly calm down and think about the situation no matter where she was. Although the Hellion clan was currently occupied by someone else, that scumbag of a father wouldn't kill her because he wanted to maintain his own face in front of others. Otherwise, everyone would know that a dignified court official was actually ungrateful to the extent of not even leaving the Hellion clan's sole bloodline behind. On the contrary, because he was a hypocrite, there were many things that he could not do too much. Hellion Vivian knew that she, who had no martial chi, was a disgrace to the entire Hellion clan. That was why all those people had switched sides and stood on Hellion Jiaoer's side. She didn't even have the right to attend the clan meeting, which was open to everyone. How laughable. She was obviously the only descendant of the Hellion family. If it weren't for this, she would have died countless times already. It could be said that the current Hellion Vivian had no one to rely on. It seemed that she was in a very bad situation. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and narrowed her eyes as she analyzed her current situation. A good-for-nothing with no one to rely on. In addition to her stepmother and stepsister who were eyeing her covetously, it was simply terrible to the extreme. Since young Miss is fine, quickly get up. There are important guests in the residence. If young Miss is seen in this state by those young masters, I'm afraid that your reputation will. Before Lady May could finish her words, she heard a series of footsteps not far away, followed by Hellion Jiaoer's crying, "I clearly remember that when I left, the jade was still in my hand. Why can't I find it?" "Elder sister, don't worry. When we left, that good-for-nothing was here. Now that the jade is gone, it must have been taken by her. Let's go and find her now. We can't let her bully you all the time," Hellion May said righteously. She turned around and led the other young ladies to the side of the river. She glared fiercely at Hellion Vivian. If it wasn't for the servant's report, she wouldn't have known that this good-for-nothing was so lucky. She couldn't even drown to death. The other young ladies also saw Hellion Vivian's miserable state. They all used their fans to cover their smiling lips and asked hypocritically, "Hellion Vivian, what happened to you? How did you end up in such a miserable state? Even if the crown prince broke off the engagement, you didn't have to drown yourself." Being ridiculed and discussed by a large group of people, Wei Wei actually didn't have the slightest intention of getting up. On the contrary, her left leg slightly bent, extended her hand and swept her wet long hair behind her forehead. It was obviously an ordinary movement, but when she did it, it had an indescribable cool and arrogant air. She didn't even raise her eyebrows, only used a pair of deep and clear eyes to closely stare at Hellion Jiaoer. "This is the result you want?" "Elder sister, what are you talking about? Jiaoer doesn't understand at all. Jiaoer only came to look for the jade pendant." Hellion Jiaoer pitifully bit her lips. Her beautiful eyes rippled with tears, as if she was wronged and about to cry. Hellion Vivian sneered in her heart. She was indeed an expert at acting. Everyone knew that in ancient times, chastity was more important than life. Hellion Wei Wei, whose engagement had been broken off, had already become the laughingstock of the entire capital. Now, unexpectedly, her entire body was dripping wet, and she was being watched by so many people. Such a big commotion would definitely alarm those young masters in the study room. Hellion Jiaoer didn't just want to snatch her engagement. What this woman wanted to do was to completely destroy her. Hellion Jiaoer felt guilty after being questioned by Hellion Vivian. Her eyes drifted away. When she raised her head again, she was already delicate and pitiful. She bit her red lips and said with tears in her voice, "Elder sister, if you have any anger, just vent it out. Why do you have to wrongly accuse me?" After speaking, Hellion Jiaoer sobbed and cried in Hellion May's arms. Hellion May's temper was very bad. She shouted loudly, "There is no justice in this world. Using your status to bully us like this, Hellion Vivian. Are you not afraid that the heavens will have eyes to take you away?" Hearing this, when those rich young ladies looked at Wei Wei, their gazes carried obvious disdain, as if they were looking at smelly mud that couldn't be lifted up under their feet. They loathed her as much as they could. Hellion Vivian coldly curled her lips. Her eyes darkened as she crossed her arms and watched the sisters put on a show. Based on her experience, this matter wouldn't end so easily. Sure enough, Before the surrounding voices could finish, Hellion Jower exclaimed loudly, "Elder sister, what is that shiny thing on your body? It can't be a jade pendant, right?" Almost at the same time, Hellion May pretended to shout loudly. Her voice was full of contempt. "I told you that she took it. Hellion Vivian, you clearly know that it is second sister's jade pendant, yet you secretly hid it. This is stealing. See if I don't strip you." After Hellion May finished speaking, she bared her fangs and brandished her claws as she pounced over. However, before she could touch Hellion Vivian's sleeve, a loud slap was heard. The crisp slap didn't drag and nimbly stopped her in her tracks. Chapter 3. Hellion May covered her left cheek and looked at the person who hit her in disbelief. She was so angry that she almost went crazy. "You slut! How dare you hit me, you!" Slap! Another sharp and clear sound rang out. Hellion Vivian's clothes fluttered in the wind. Her thin lips curved slightly, and even when she spoke, there was a cold smile, "Sister." Everyone was stunned. Everything happened too quickly. They didn't even have time to react. At that moment, they didn't even know who Hellion Vivian was calling. Wei Wei lightly smiled as she met Hellion May's astonished gaze. She lightly blew on her fingertips and opened her mouth with a smile. "Younger sister, you can go out and ask around. In this Seiju city, which family's concubine's daughter from outside the family dares to question eldest sister? If you don't want to live, say it earlier. You. What kind of eldest sister are you? You're just a slut." Hellion May gritted her teeth. She was obviously not convinced. "You? Ugh." Hellion Vivian turned around abruptly and clasped her neck with her left hand. Her whole body emitted a gorgeous aura that could almost burn people's eyes. "It seems that you don't want this mouth anymore." Hellion Vivian sneered and used force. Her wet long hair hung down, like a demon walking out of the water. With a real murderous aura, she froze the atmosphere of the whole scene. None of the noble ladies around dared to step forward. Even if they met Hellion Vivian's eyes, they couldn't help but feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. That kind of coldness from hell seemed to be able to kill people in an instant. Hellion Jower looked at them from afar. Her small face darkened. What's wrong with this good-for-nothing? She doesn't even have the slightest bit of martial chi, and yet she's still here. She's simply courting death. However, before Hellion Jower could open her mouth, a deep and dignified voice sounded in the air. "What are you all doing?" Everyone turned around to look. It was the head of the defense general's residence, Hellion Guangyao. He didn't come alone. Behind him were a few young masters from aristocratic families. Murong Xiaofeng, who had just divorced Hellion Vivian, was also among them. He was wearing a dark blue fur robe. His facial features were fair, and his face was handsome. Especially that pair of phoenix eyes. They were like ancient inkstones, deep and serene, making people unable to shift their gaze away. Hellion Vivian swept her gaze over the womenfolk present, only to see that each and every one of their faces were flushed red, their gazes infatuated. Their eyes that were looking at Murong Changfeng also paused for a moment. No wonder the previous her was dead set on him. Even if this man didn't do anything, he still had the capital to make people go crazy for him. However, after Murong Changfeng's pair of eyes saw Hellion Vivian, it was obvious that layers upon layers of unconcealable disdain gushed out. On the contrary, the person sitting in the darkest corner by the river slowly put down the teacup in his hand. His robe was half open, his eyelids were slightly lifted, his fingertips were casually tapping on the fine blue and white porcelain. His cold and ascetic aura, coupled with that silver mask on his face, made his whole body emit a kind of unique temperament, making people unable to help but want to submit to him. The man's bony fingers brushed the non-existent dust from the corner of his robe. His phoenix eyes seemed to flash a ray of light, inexplicably lazy and playful. On the other side, half of Hellion May's face was swollen. She was panting with rage as she looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Jower's eyes were slightly red, with an appearance of being wronged. Hellion Guangyao's most beloved daughter was Hellion Jower. At this time, seeing that she was wronged, his pair of black eyes became completely cold. Carrying an ice-cold sharpness, he swept a glance at Hellion Vivian, with obvious disgust and severity. "What the hell is going on, father?" Hellion May covered her own face and fiercely said, "Second sister lost her jade. Just now, only eldest sister was at the riverside. Clearly, she was the one who secretly hid the jade, but still wasn't willing to hand it over. She even hit me." Hellion Jiaoer pretended to pull her and shook her head. "Third sister, don't say any more. It's just a jade pendant. If eldest sister likes it, then just give it to her. It's just that I've let father's painstaking efforts down. That jade pendant was brought back by father from the western regions. I can't bear to wear it on normal days. I hope eldest sister will treat this jade pendant well and wipe it from time to time. As for your face, second sister will apply some ointment when we get back. We can't afford to offend eldest sister." The more she said, the angrier Hellion Guangyao became. For so many years, he had been tolerating Hellion Vivian's arrogance and willfulness. To Hellion Guangyao, Hellion Vivian was a disgrace that he didn't even want to mention. It was because of this good-for-nothing that he was constantly reminded that he was a son-in-law who married into the Hellion family. Now, this stain actually dared to bully his beloved daughter like this. Today, if he didn't teach her a good lesson, it would be hard to appease the anger in his heart. Thinking of this, Hellion Guangyao raised the whip in his hand and was about to whip Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian's eyes flickered and her long legs kicked out handsomely. With a loud bang, the whip was kicked to the side. Hellion Guangyao was obviously shocked. He didn't expect his incompetent eldest daughter to be able to do such a thing. "Hellion Vivian, you. Good, you're really good. You even dare to disobey your father." Hellion Vivian laughed softly. "I just don't want to be beaten for no reason. How is this disobedience?" "Eldest sister, you still haven't given up until now." Hellion May rushed over with her eyes wide open. "Second sister saw that you have shiny things on your body." Hellion Wei curved her thin lips and said, "A shiny thing is a jade pendant? Then your whole body exudes the unique luster of a nouveau riche. Shouldn't you change your name to Explosive Charm?" The onlookers couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hellion May had always liked to wear gold and silver. In the past, she only thought that it was bright, but looking at it now, it was indeed very gaudy. "Eldest sister, you shouldn't bully third sister anymore." Hellion Jiao Air's long, shapely eyebrows slightly creased. Her face, as beautiful as a flower, carried an expression of pity. "If the family is harmonious, everything will prosper. Next time, if eldest sister sees something that you like, just tell me. There's no need to make father angry." Hearing this, Hellion Guangyao's hand tightened on the whip, as if he was very angry. "Enough. Hellion Vivian, if you don't admit your mistake, then get out of here. The general's residence doesn't want a thief." Get out." Hellion Vivian's mouth curved up. Her voice was cold. "If I didn't mention it, wouldn't everyone forget? I, Hellion Vivian, am the true successor of the Hellion family, and you are just a son-in-law who married into the family." Chapter 4. You. Hellion Guangyao's entire body trembled. He no longer cared about the presence of the nobles and raised his hand to slap Hellion Vivian. Slap. Hellion Guangyao's hand landed on Hellion Vivian's face. This slap was very heavy. Hellion Vivian clearly could have avoided it, but she didn't turn her head. She took the slap with a pair of cold eyes. So this is General Hulian's way of repaying a debt of gratitude. Not only did you not distinguish between right and wrong, you even allowed your beloved daughter to slander me. As she spoke, she threw away the thing in her hand. Her pair of eyes carried a sense of justice. In that moment, it was almost enough to burn people's hearts. After listening to Hellion Vivian's words, everyone's heart trembled. When they looked at Hellion Guangyao again, they more or less carried some probing. Hellion Guangyao was so angry that his facial features were distorted, but he was blocked by Hellion Vivian's words and couldn't say a single word. This was also the reason why Hellion Vivian clearly could have avoided that slap, but still took it. She wanted to expose all of this scum's filth, so that he wouldn't have the slightest chance to retaliate. It was very obvious that Hellion Guangyao was confused by his anger. He also didn't have any warning or preparation. Therefore, Hellion Guangyao didn't react for a moment. But that didn't mean that Helian Jiaoer wouldn't retaliate. She half closed her eyes. After a while, she opened her mouth. Her voice was sweet and soft, but there was a hidden needle in the silk. Since eldest sister insists that you were wronged, it would be better to let the servants check and give eldest sister justice. Hearing this, everyone nodded incessantly. Second Miss Helian was really kind. At this kind of time, she didn't forget to give people a way out. However, Helian Wei saw through the viciousness in her eyes with a single glance. Heh, what a nice way to put it. Give her justice? She was simply using different ways to humiliate her. Now that her whole body was drenched and she was touched by a few big men, how was she going to live in the future? It seems that younger sister wants to push me into the fire pit? Helian Jiaoer lowered her head. Jiaoer wants eldest sister to be innocent. Since eldest sister insists that she was wronged, she shouldn't be afraid of being investigated. What if you can't find what you want? Helian Vivian's tone was cold. Helian Jiaoer smiled. If we can't find anything, then Jiaoer will personally kneel down and apologize to eldest sister. She didn't believe that this woman would dare to be touched by others. Sister, you must remember what you said. Helian Vivian curled her lips into a smile, like a queen walking out from the flames of war. There's no need to search. I'll search for it myself. With that, she untied the belt of her outer robe with a swish. Then, with a shake of her hand, her robe instantly turned inside out. Left, and right, everything was open and spacious. There wasn't anything sparkling, and there wasn't even a good jade pendant. Everyone instantly sucked in a deep breath, because no one would have thought that Helian Wei would be so daring to actually tear off her robe in front of so many people. Did she not plan to marry again? However, these people would never understand that Helian Vivian had never cared about her reputation. As long as she wanted to achieve great things, she would be ruthless to others and even more ruthless to herself. This kind of ruthlessness really shocked Helian Jiaoer to the ground. How could this be? She had obviously hidden the jade pendant on Helian Wei's body in order to have a backup plan. But where was the jade pendant? In an instant, Helian Jiaoer's face lost all color. Helian Vivian's hair was originally long. Now that she was no longer bound by her outer robe, it hung straight below her waist. It was fluffy and slightly curly, like dark seaweed draped behind her back. She looked like a black-eyed mermaid stranded on the shore. She curled her lips into a smile and coldly said, "Younger sister, shouldn't you kneel down to me now?" In an instant, the courtyard was terrifyingly quiet. Everyone couldn't help but raise their heads and look at Wei Wei. They saw that although her body was frail, she was lofty and unyielding. Her filthy clothes and her arrogant and apathetic face formed a strong contrast. From inside out, she exuded a cold and threatening aura, making people not dare to underestimate her. Helian Jiaoer was like a willow branch in the cold wind. Her body trembled, but she didn't stop. What should I do? She was going to live in the palace in the future. Now that she was kneeling here, even if she was going to be famous in the future, she wouldn't be able to erase this stain. But if she didn't kneel down, her reputation would be ruined in front of everyone's eyes. Did she really have to kneel down to this bitch? As if she saw through Helian Jiaoer's dilemma, Helian Vivian's eyes revealed a faint ridicule. She looked at Helian Jiaoer, little by little, about to kneel down. Just at this time, a pair of hands suddenly stretched out and stopped her. Not outside doesn't mean that there isn't inside. The matter hasn't been investigated clearly. How can you talk about kneeling and apologizing? Murong Changfeng's righteous words reached the clouds. That angular face under the setting sun looked particularly handsome. Helian Jiaoer immediately cast a grateful look at him. Lord, everyone knew that if Murong Changfeng didn't say this, Helian Jiaoer could only kneel down. But now that Murong Changfeng said it, those suspicions fell on Helian Vivian again. Facing one face after another, Helian Vivian didn't shrink back. Instead, she straightened her back even more. Her long sleeves floated in the air, shining brightly for tens of thousands of li. Before the age of 7, this body was doted on by everyone. At that time, her grandfather was still alive. Her martial chi was superior, and she was one of the top martial arts geniuses in the capital. After the age of 7, her grandfather passed away. Her mother was critically ill. Helian Guangyao brought her stepmother into the family. In one night, she lost not only her inner strength, but also the aura of a rich young lady. In a short time, Helian Vivian became a waste that everyone despised. They despised her for being rude and unreasonable, saying that she bullied a concubine's daughter and insulted her concubine. She didn't care because she knew that she still had him. However, Helian Vivian didn't expect that the 7-year-old innate talent test would destroy this man's gentleness as well. In her opinion, this Murong Chang Feng wasn't worth any sentimental attachment. Young Master Murong is right. Not outside doesn't mean that there isn't inside. Originally, this matter would have ended here, but Helian Mei and the others were more shameless than expected. From the beginning, they had already made up their minds to kill Helian Vivian today. Since they had already framed her, they would frame her to the end. However, Helian Vivian only had this one piece of inner clothing left. If she took it off, she was afraid that, however, before everyone's eyes could gather on Helian Vivian's inner clothing, a pure white outer garment with dark golden clouds embroidered on it welcomed the gentle breeze and floated over. It was graceful and elegant to the extreme. It was draped over Helian Vivian's slender and thin body, becoming an unexpectedly gorgeous battle robe. After seeing that cloak, Helian Guangyao's expression changed abruptly. Even those young ladies from aristocratic families couldn't sit still. They started to look left and right in panic. Their eyes carried shyness, but also a hard-to-detect joy. They couldn't control their small faces from turning slightly red. Faintly, Helian Vivian heard Aunt May whisper beside her, "It's the third prince. The ghost palace is here." Chapter 5. Ghost Palace? Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows slightly. This person was not unfamiliar in her memory. He was the most special existence in the Dragon War Empire. As early as 10 years ago, he broke through the 10th level of martial chi and became the #1 martial arts genius in the world. The illustrious third prince of the current dynasty should have had a boundless future. The world was within his reach, but because of a fire in his palace, he lost all of his martial chi. That day happened to be the Ghost Festival in the 7th month of the lunar calendar. From then on, the name Ghost Palace was spread. He would not easily step out of his palace. His movements were mysterious, and he was as lazy as a demon. People longed to be able to get close to him, because those who had been guided by him would always break through martial chi in a short period of time and advance. However, in the depths of their hearts, they were afraid of this person and did not dare to approach him. Thud, thud. The sound of unhurried footsteps gradually approached in a steady and regular manner. Helian Vivian could clearly see Helian Mei at the side trembling fiercely. When she looked up again, a slender man appeared at the end of the riverbank. His face wore a silver mask and his temperament was like jade. Even if he did not say a word, from his body, one could feel a nobility that was superior to others. The style of the clothes on his body was complicated and exquisite. It seemed that every part of it had reached the peak of elegance. The wide sleeves hung down in layers and layers, creating a cool breeze as he walked. When he approached, he slowly stopped his footsteps. The distinct color of the red cloth and the white of his neck formed a strong contrast. Immediately, the pair of phoenix eyes under the mask were cold and glaring, as if they wanted to suppress all of the glamour. Perhaps it was not only those eyes. The aura of abstinence emitted from his whole body was difficult to ignore. Since he walked over, everything around him suddenly faded away and ceased to exist. This humble official did not know Your Highness had arrived. Sorry for not going out to meet you. Helian Guangyao could not help but take a step forward and quickly bowed his head and cupped his hands. The young ladies standing at the side also followed suit and bowed. Their eyes looked at Beligaju from time to time, their eyes full of shyness. Helian Guangyao did not know how long he had been here and did not know how much he had heard of the matter just now. He only wanted to speak again. Your Highness, how does my outer garment look? Beligaju didn't pay attention to Helian Guangyao. He leisurely swept his gaze over everyone present and opened his mouth indifferently. His voice contained a kind of empty iciness, low and deep like a fine musical instrument, but even so, It was difficult to conceal the danger that came from his body from time to time. Everyone looked at each other. They couldn't figure out the meaning behind this person's words. There was a moment of stagnation in the air. Hellion Guangyao had no choice but to stand up and help. Your Highness, you like the quiet. There are many people here. Why don't we go to the study room? Beligaju elegantly fiddled with the silver knife in his hand. This Highness is asking about the outer garment. Lord Hellion must be too old to hear clearly. Everyone was stunned on the spot. What do you think? The silver knife pointed at Hellion Mei, whose tears had not dried yet. Hellion Mei trembled from head to toe and immediately knelt on the ground in fear. She stuttered, third, royal, spare me. Yet Bailey Jiaju didn't even spare her a glance. Even Hellion Jiaoer, whose beauty captivated the birds and beasts, was always bewitchingly cold and detached. Just when everyone thought he was about to leave, Beligaju suddenly stopped in front of Hellion Vivian. He stood under the sunlight, raised his head, and looked straight at Hellion Vivian. His dark pupils were wild and arrogant, directly reflecting in Hellion Vivian's eyes. What do you think, Miss? Lady May pulled Hellion Vivian's sleeve worriedly, afraid that she would be impulsive and offend this man who was not to be trifled with. Hellion Vivian didn't care at all, the corners of her mouth slightly raised with a smile. Not bad, it's quite warm when I wear it. Is that so? Beligaju asked her casually. Without any warning, he pinched Hellion Vivian's chin and looked at her dark little face. His voice carried a dangerous evilness. You're not bad either. Everyone was in an uproar, especially Hellion Jiaoer, who was standing at the side. She clenched her hands tightly, her eyes filled with sinister jealousy. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. To be honest, this man in front of her, no matter whether it was his actions or his posture, he exuded an elegance that women were infatuated with. However, the only problem was, the target of his bewitchment was her. Hellion Vivian didn't take a step back, nor did she have the slightest bit of fear. She only smiled lightly, her clear eyes looking straight at Beligaju. She looked at him from top to bottom, as if she was looking at a product. Then, she imitated the man's actions and pinched his chin in an even more seductive manner. She lazily replied, "You look like you're still lacking a little." Damn it! This silver mask was hard and cold in her hand. It wasn't fun at all. This man still wore it all day. If he wasn't too ugly, then he was a clean freak. Hellion Vivian cursed in her heart, but there wasn't the slightest change in her delicate face. She had the aura of a hedonist that couldn't be blown away. Lady May had just regained her senses from Beligaju's unexpected actions when she heard her young Miss Unique provocation. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. What time was it now? Young Miss was still joking. Did she know who the man standing in front of her was? Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. At that moment, the mist from the lake seemed to have spread into his eyes. The black coldness engulfed the entire area, oppressing everyone's nerves. In the dark, countless followers broke out in cold sweat, trembling with fear. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. This was because they weren't sure how angry their master would be next. Would he take Hellion Vivian's life, or would he simply dye the entire Defense Division residents with blood? The former, they could still consider. After all, in the past, there was a beauty who recklessly climbed onto their master's dragon bed. With a wave of his hand, he sent her directly to the military camp. The latter, "Master, calm down, calm down. No matter what, this is still the Defense Division residence, Old Man Hullion's territory. If the Emperor knew that you destroyed the Defense Division residence, he would come after us." Chapter 6. Beligaju slightly narrowed his eyes. He had lived for so many years, but this was the first time in his life that he was being teased. Recalling the fear and flattery people had towards him in the past, Beligaju lightly frowned. When there was a comparison, there would be a distinction between superiority and inferiority. At this moment, this reckless little thing clearly had the air of a general compared to those women. Of course, it was also very reckless. The Hellion Jiaoer at the side rolled her eyes and gently said, "Your Highness, please calm down. Big Sister didn't mean to make you angry. I'm sure your highness has also heard rumors about Big Sister. Her reputation, is quite bold. The word bold was used here, and everyone knew what it meant. All the young ladies had always felt that the things Helly and Vivian did were shameful. Now, their eyes were filled with contempt. When Beligaju heard this, his thin lips curled up. It was difficult to tell whether he was happy or angry. When the Hellion Giaour saw this, she shyly lowered her head. As one of the most beautiful and talented people in the Dragon War Empire, she believed that no man could escape from her. Now that she was able to catch the attention of her sweetheart, she was naturally happy. Beligaju looked at her, and the smile on his face deepened. However, the more beautiful that smile was, the more the ridicule in his eyes was. The Hellion Giaour still didn't know anything. She was still fantasizing that he would turn around and talk to her. Beligaju retracted his gaze and used his ivory-white fingers to raise Hellion Vivian's chin a little. In that position, he slightly lowered his eyes, as if he was kissing her. How could this be? Didn't he hear what she said? That slut was not acceptable at all. The Hellion Giaour was crazy with jealousy. The handkerchief in her hand was fiercely crushed by her hand. However, Beligaju turned a blind eye to all of this. He suddenly suppressed his breath and moved very close to her. He was so close that Hellion Vivian could smell the faint sandalwood fragrance on his body, mixed with the unfamiliar coldness of a man, and an indescribable smell of gunpowder that choked her nose. Woman, remember, you were the one who provoked me first. These kind of threatening words were practically whispered into her ear. Wei Wei creased her eyebrows and hugged the blood-red cloak on her body. She watched the man's back as he flicked his sleeves and left. Her eyes slightly flashed. Beligaju slowly walked out of the pear garden, surrounded by the stars. His pure inner garment was stained by the setting sun, bringing out an unexpected demonic aura. Even though he had left, the remaining pressure was still there. After a while, Lady May let out a heavy sigh of relief. Miss, how dare you speak to Ghost Palace like that? I'm in a rush. Hellion Vivian stretched lazily and said calmly, Aunt May, let's go back. Lady May hesitated. But the wound on Mrs. Forehead, don't worry, I won't suffer this injury for nothing. Hellion Vivian coldly blew away her bangs. Right now, she had just arrived on this continent and hadn't completely tidied up yet. Wait until later. She will definitely make the people who slandered her pay with blood. After respectfully sending off Beligaju, Hellion Guangyao turned his head and saw his eldest daughter leaving. He faintly felt a bit uncertain in his heart. Was this the bearing that his good-for-nothing daughter should have? However, Hellion Guangyao, who had never put Hellion Vivian in his eyes, didn't think too much about it. Instead, he first observed Murong Changfeng's expression. Murong Changfeng was obviously somewhat absent-minded. He looked at the direction that Hellion Vivian left in, not knowing what he was thinking. Master, what kind of trick is this Miss Hellion playing? Cixi, who was standing beside Murong Changfeng, couldn't help but open his mouth. His tone was full of disbelief, and even his eyes were wide open. In the past, whenever that debauchee saw Master, she would always rush forward. How come this time she didn't even look at Master and left? What do you think? Murong Changfeng retracted his gaze from Hellion Vivian. His tone was neither light nor light. See, she coldly humphed. She previously pestered Master so tightly. Now she's doing the opposite. She's clearly loosening the reins only to grasp them better. Hearing what was said, Murong Changfeng no longer spoke. His handsome face carried a deep sense of disgust. When Hellion Guangyao saw this, he laughed loudly and said, Lord shouldn't mind this old official's disappointing daughter. Actually, Jiao Heir's matter still needs to trouble Lord Murong. Murong Changfeng glanced at Hellion Giaour and saw her shyly lower her eyes. The corners of his mouth hooked up into a smile. General Hellion, rest assured. Jiao Heir is now a member of White Academy. Relying on her martial chi cultivation, as long as she can win in White Academy's annual martial arts competition, at that time I will naturally introduce her to Master and see whether or not she has the opportunity to become an armament master. Armament. Hellion Giaour's breath tightened, her small face shining. Martial cultivation was the dream of every martial artist. Possessing a suitable martial cultivation would increase one's battle prowess by 100-fold. However, the number of martial cultivators who were able to create armaments was very few. This was because armaments were not like those ordinary weapons. Only when one's cultivation had reached a certain level and also possessed the talent to dismantle weapons could one become a martial cultivator. If she could have a master to guide her. Hellion Jiaoer raised her eyes. During last year's martial chi test, Lord Morong was also present. Among the martial artists of Jiao Er's age, there are very few who can compete with me. Jiao Er will definitely win. Hellion Guangyao nodded and stroked his beard. He was immensely proud of having the champion in his arms. On the other side, after Hellion Vivian returned to her residence, she did not immediately return to her room. Instead, she looked at the courtyard not far away and narrowed her eyes. Ever since her mother passed away, this place seemed to have been abandoned. It was obviously the best direction, warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and planted with red flowers. How many years had it been? Yet it was firmly locked up by heavy iron locks. It was time to let it see the light of day again. Hellion Vivian pulled out the white jade key from around her neck and opened the lock with a click. But in exchange, Aunt May looked at her in astonishment. "Miss, didn't you say that you would have nightmares when this courtyard was opened? It won't happen in the future." Hellion Vivian's calm eyes flashed with light. She calmly sized up the entire study room. The furnishings inside had been changed. The sandalwood rocking chair that her grandfather liked when he was alive was also sold by Madame Sue. The current Hellion residence was no longer people and no longer objects. Hellion Vivian stood alone in the ancient and empty study room. Her fingers slowly slid across the bookshelf, her eyes cold. This place must have been searched by someone. The furnishings in the room were very messy, but it wasn't that obvious. The orderly appearance made it seem as if it had been disrupted and then restored. If it wasn't Wei Wei, but anyone else, it was very likely that they wouldn't be able to detect it, because this kind of subtle detail could only be seen through by someone with rich experience. Hellion Vivian's fingers stopped on a very old book. She did not know which era this book was handwritten, but there were many words that she could not understand. As soon as Hellion Wei Wei opened it, the wooden window started to shake violently, as if something was about to break through the ground outside the door. Chapter 7. Hellion Vivian abruptly turned her head around and saw that the dense sunlight in front of her was reflecting multicolored rays of light. Because the rays of light were too sharp, it made it impossible for her to see clearly what was standing there. Just when she focused her gaze, she saw a waterfall-like silvery light. In contrast, that person was wearing a black, ancient robe that carried a dense demonic aura. His exposed chest was clearly defined and filled with coldness. And at this moment, that person raised his head to accept the baptism of the twilight. He looked up to the sky and let out a long breath. Soon after, he started laughing loudly. That laughter was filled with excitement and longing for the world. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her brows. Her first reaction was, this person is not a human. Finally, that person retracted that arrogant laughter and turned around to look at Hellion Vivian. The corner of his mouth that was stained with blood slowly raised. His sharp white teeth could be vaguely seen as he asked, "Are you the one who released this overlord?" Clearly, other than you and me, there isn't a third person here. Hellion Wei Wei closed the ancient book in her hand, crossed her slender legs, leaned back, and casually leaned against the back of the chair, forming a unique style of surly handsomeness. The man raised his brows. "You don't seem to be afraid of me at all?" Hellion Vivian originally wanted to reply that it was because of his good looks. However, she saw that the man's complexion suddenly changed. It was as if there was some kind of mark that entered his bone marrow along his blood vessels. The man painfully narrowed his eyes and roared in a low voice, "Damn it, woman! What did you do to this overlord?" Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders. How would she know? She had also just transmigrated here. Okay. It's a demonic contract. You contracted this overlord? The man fiercely raised his eyes. Like a trapped beast that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, his silver hair was recklessly fluttering in the wind. His entire body was filled with ruthlessness. Hellion Vivian stared blankly as a pair of white furry wolf ears appeared on top of his head. Her phoenix eyes lit up and she couldn't help but stretch out her hand. "You dare! Woman, I'm warning you. If you dare to touch a single strand of my hair, I'll cut off your hands." The man's domineering black eyes narrowed, and his face was filled with anger. Hellion Vivian didn't care about him. She grabbed the wolf's ears and asked, "Is it true?" The man was speechless. "What do you think?" He sneered. It was one thing for this woman to insult his body, but she even insulted the authenticity of his ears. This was simply intolerable. Hellion Vivian smiled evilly. "It feels good. Who asked you how it felt?" The man was so angry that his two silver-white ears twitched. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised her eyebrows. "Very good. You even know how to act cute." "What the hell is acting cute?" The man gritted his teeth in anger. He had finally regained his freedom, but now he had fallen into the claws of a human. How hateful. "It seems like you've been trapped by this book for many years." Hellion Wei slowly tried to find out more information. The man's handsome face was gloomy as he replied, 500 years. "Otherwise, do you think you can contract me so easily with your ability? You can also leave." Hellion Vivian didn't care whether he was there or not. The man's eyes darkened. "If I could leave, I would have left long ago. Once a contract is established, I must stay by the contractor's side. Furthermore, the contractor can't disobey the contractor until the contractor completes his wish. Otherwise, his primordial spirit will be destroyed, and he will never be able to reincarnate. In other words, the current me is already your master." Hellion Wei held the armrest of the chair with one hand and slowly stood up from the wooden chair. At that moment, she was no longer gentle and smiling. Her back was straight and arrogant to the extreme. Light and darkness converged on this woman's body. She was obviously so frail and thin, yet in that split second, she burst forth with the feeling of someone who was the master of the world and was the only one in the world. This made the man's evil eyes slowly widen. In the end, he curled up the corner of his mouth with interest. "This human is a bit interesting. You can understand it that way." Suddenly, the man laughed. His domineering eyes flashed with an inconspicuous light. Right now, his primordial spirit was severely damaged. Following the contractor's side would help him heal. Moreover, he was looking forward to seeing how this girl would complete her wish. If it was to kill someone, he would be very happy. The man lightly licked his thin lips. There was actually a kind of evil aura. Hellion Vivian casually flipped through the ancient book in her hand. "In that case, first tell me, what's your name?" "My surname is Yuan, and my name is Ming." The man's arrogant eyes quietly waited for this human to hear his name and cast a fanatical gaze at him. But Hellion Vivian lightly smiled. "I haven't heard of it." Yuan Ming fiercely glared at Hellion Vivian. His black pupils sank. "Woman, do you feel that your body is different?" Hearing this, Hellion Vivian looked at the opposite side of the bronze mirror. It turned out that a corner of that dark face was broken, revealing the white skin inside. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Her fingers rubbed her chin. She suddenly laughed. "Interesting. It is indeed interesting." Yuan Ming half curved his thin lips. "Just now when we came out, I checked your meridians. According to reason, you should be a martial arts genius, but your 6 meridians are blocked, and your martial chi is blocked. Woman, there are some people who don't want to see you do well." Hearing this news, Hellion Vivian was surprisingly calm. "There are many people who don't want to see me do well. They are just some ants who like to jump around. As for my meridians, do you have a way to cultivate them? Not only can I help you cultivate your meridians, I can also give you an extra treasure. Now, I will remove all the poison in your body. You will regain the strength to cultivate." Following Yuan Ming's arrogant voice that sounded beside Hellion Vivian's ears, Hellion Vivian suddenly felt an overwhelming pain in her 4 limbs. She didn't even have time to ask more before she fell into darkness. When she opened her eyes again, the sky outside was already bright. If it wasn't for the thin layer of sweat on her forehead, Hellion Vivian would have thought that everything was a dream. However, Hellion Vivian knew that it wasn't a dream. The ancient book flipped to a fixed position, and lines of blood words appeared. The contract is established. Life and death will not change. Helene Vivian smiled and kept the ancient book in her arms. Damn woman, hugging him so tightly. She must have fallen in love with him. Yuan Ming thought awkwardly. He coldly snorted twice and hid in the ancient book, falling into a deep sleep. Helene Vivian slept in the desolate courtyard for a night. Lady May was naturally worried, but what made her even more anxious was that she received a letter from the White Academy. Helene Vivian, female, 16 years old, low-level martial chi, poor physical aptitude, barely passing in theory. Due to absence for many years, I hereby warn you that if you don't complete the admission procedures in time, the White Academy will completely revoke your admission qualifications in 10 days. Helene Vivian looked at the inexplicable letter in front of her. Why was it that she could understand every word when it was taken apart, but when it was put together, it made her feel so dizzy? Go to school? Ha 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 ha. Wasn't this in the ancient times? Didn't they say that they would fight in the palace and climb up the tree? She, the queen of mercenaries, had to carry a small bag to school? What was she going to do? Blow up the school? Chapter 8. Young Miss. Lady May looked at her young Miss's uncertain expression and let out a long sigh. This old servant knows that you don't want to enter this academy. That year when White Academy was accepting students, you were the first to pass the test. However, ever since that test, it has been 8 years. Every time you step into that place, you are bound to be mocked. But miss, this time you can't delay anymore. If you delay, you won't be able to go anymore. Helene Vivian said lightly, Lady May, don't worry. I know what to do. In her memory, White Academy was the place she was most afraid of going to. Not only because of ridicule, but also because when she was 7 years old, she became famous there and shocked the whole capital. She was worried that without martial chi, she wouldn't be able to keep the pride she brought to her mother. That was why she didn't want to go to school again. Helene Vivian narrowed her eyes. Wait, what was that? Things to note for new students. The tuition fee is 10,000 taels, a total of 3 years. Pay in one go on the first day of school? And there's a fee? 10,000 taels. She didn't even have 1,000 taels. Helene Vivian's fingers tapped on the wooden table lazily. This was what she often did when she was thinking. That person from Madame Sue was smart in this aspect. She never shorted her food and clothing, and even ordered the servants to deliver the best quality silk. However, she also absolutely wouldn't give way even a little bit of money. In the eyes of outsiders, her stepmother was generous to her, but it was just a facade. Helene Vivian understood that if she couldn't enter White Academy on time, everything would be in vain, because only there, she could reclaim the glory that belonged to her. Lady May also saw the 10,000 taels. After hesitating for a long time, she stood up. Miss, you don't have to worry about the tuition fee. I will go to the main courtyard to find Master now. No need. Helene Vivian put down the letter casually. Lady May, remember, he is he, I am me. Don't go to that scum every time something happens. Helene Vivian, don't need it. Lady May's eyes shook. She smiled. Okay, I won't go. Madam, did you see? Mrs. changed. She has completely changed. This was the bloodline of the Helene family, tough and unyielding, clearly distinguishing between love and hate. But the school fees, Lady May was still worried. Speaking of which, those who were able to enter the White Academy were all the heirs of the Dragon War Empire's wealthiest and most influential families, so these 10,000 taels were just a piece of cake for them. But to the current Lady May, she didn't have enough money even if she wanted to. Helene Vivian stood up. Her black eyes were filled with an evil smile. I have my ways. Lady May wanted to ask, what can you do? However, when she saw the smile on Helene Vivian's face, she swallowed her words. Although she knew it was impossible, she still hoped that perhaps Miss really had a good idea. Noon, War Dragon Imperial City. Endless streams of horses and carriages filled the area. Helene Wei lazily walked on the bluestone path, listening to the hawkers' cries along the way. Only then did she truly realize that she had indeed arrived at an ancient dynasty. Hey, woman, you've already walked for so long. Aren't you tired? Yuan Ming, who was hidden in the ancient book, opened his mouth. His voice was as arrogant as usual. Hellion Vivian ignored him. Yuan Ming heavily snorted. Wait until he recovered his strength. The first thing he would do was to properly teach this woman a lesson. Too impudent. Not cute at all. Hey, did you guys hear? The Phoenix Pavilion is gathering armament masters. The winner will get 100,000 taels of silver. This is an opportunity that only comes around once every few years. I haven't seen an armament master yet. 100,000 taels of silver? Hellion Vivian heard this and stopped in her tracks. Her eyes slightly narrowed, and her thin lips curved into a smile. It was really a case of wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it by chance. She just so happened to be lacking in money. So why not go and see if this gathering could earn her some money? Forget about the armament masters. They're usually very old. There's no point in looking at them. Hellion Vivian chuckled to herself as she walked. When Yuan Ming heard this, he almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. When others heard the 3 words armament master, they would think about whether or not they could get a suitable armament for themselves. She was great, only caring about whether or not they looked good. Woman, can you be a bit more serious? If she continued to be so lazy, when would he be able to recover his strength? Hellion Vivian innocently said, I'm very serious. What part of you are serious? Yuan Ming said weakly. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. I'm serious about earning my school fees. School fees? What kind of plaything was that? Was it more important than obtaining a good armament? He really couldn't understand what this woman was thinking. Yuan Ming's ears were perked up, and his eyes were wide open. Hellion Vivian was all smiles as she turned around the long corridor and old bridge and found the legendary Phoenix building. The scale of the scene was much larger than what she had imagined. It could be said to be a sea of people. Her body's memory also told Hellion Vivian all the information related to the armament master. In the Dragon War Empire, there were very few elite armament masters. Even though many people's martial chi had reached a certain level, they didn't know how to disassemble and assemble it, so they still couldn't create an armament. In this way, it would be extremely difficult for martial artists to obtain a suitable armament for themselves. Since ancient times, the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Therefore, it wasn't strange that so many people came to watch the armament master selection. You guys, look who that is. Hellion Vivian? Why did she come? What? That trash also came? What did she come for? I saw her grades in the academy, the worst of the worst. Maybe this time, her qualifications to enter the academy will be revoked by the dean, yet she still has the mood to stroll around. She's really broad-minded. Not only is she broad-minded, I think she's simply too thick-skinned. She didn't properly stay at home after the engagement was broken off, but came out to throw away her face. As people talked, they looked at Hellion Vivian. Their gazes carried obvious ridicule. Hellion Vivian actually didn't expect to meet her classmates here. Her thin lips curved upwards, bringing out traces of coldness. Yuan Ming excitedly rubbed his hands. Are we going to fight? This senior hasn't tasted blood for a long time. Yuan Ming, I'll remind you again. We're here to earn money, not to fight. Hellion Vivian leisurely opened her mouth and lazily yawned. She completely didn't put that group of people in her eyes. Since they were classmates, what was there to be afraid of not having a chance to get back at them? What's the rush? Yuan Ming curved his lips. You're right. The future is long. Heh. At this moment, a very old woman walked out from the Phoenix building with a dazed expression. It could be seen how difficult this test was. However, the Phoenix building was more humane. The process and results of the test would be kept secret. Therefore, whether or not one failed, as long as one was steady, others wouldn't know. Who else wants to sign up? The manager looked around. Everyone looked at each other in dismay, still hesitating. Hellion Vivian strolled over. Her attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. Me? Chapter 9. Just as she finished speaking, a burst of ridicule sounded from all around. Huh? Did I hear wrongly? A piece of trash also dares to sign up for armament? This Hellion Vivian's brain wouldn't have a problem, right? Did she become stupid after the engagement was cancelled? She really overestimates herself, The steward glanced at Helly and Vivian and said with hesitation, "Come with me." After that, he turned around and walked into the Phoenix building. The test wasn't held indoors. Instead, it was held next to an antique pavilion. Inside the pavilion, there was a white jade table. On top of the stone table, there was a row of scrap iron. A white-haired old man was sitting on a rocking chair with his eyes closed. When he heard Wei Wei enter, he didn't even open his eyes. He only said in a light tone, "Everything is on the stone table. The test will last for half an hour. You can do as you see fit." From the morning until now, there wasn't a single good seedling. The old man was obviously disappointed and even lost interest in the next test. Helly and Wei Wei swept a glance over those scrap iron on the stone table. A light suddenly flashed in her eyes, as if something streaked across her smiling eyes. Yuan Ming looked at her curiously. "What's wrong with this woman? Why is she so excited all of a sudden?" Helly and Vivian only smiled and walked to the front of the stone table. She wasn't in a hurry and even seemed a little sluggish. This made the steward who was standing to the side furrow his thick eyebrows. The old man didn't mind. After all, not many people could succeed in half an hour. Sigh, he was too whimsical. He shouldn't have held the assembly here. Finally, Helly and Vivian moved. She was like an outstanding conductor. With a wave of her long sleeves, she first tied her long hair into a neat ponytail. Then she rolled up her sleeves and looked down. Her left hand disassembled, and her right hand reassembled. Her fingers were very nimble and very rhythmic. Those scrap iron in her hands seemed to have been played with. Gotcha! After one section was completed, she unhurriedly picked up the second piece of scrap iron. The old man's expression didn't change, but what surprised the steward was that he actually opened his eyes and looked over seriously. Helly and Vivian crossed her hands and casually cracked her knuckles. Multitasking, she asked, "If I win, will I get the 100,000 taels of silver?" The steward didn't expect to hear such a question and couldn't react for a moment. Helly and Vivian frowned and stopped what she was doing. No reward? Then what was the point of playing with these things? Continue. The old man spoke in a deep voice. His eyes glowed as he looked at Helly and Vivian. "Little girl, let me see how fast you can be." Helly and Vivian curled her thin lips and said with a smile, "Then give me the money first." "Silver? What silver?" It wasn't easy for the old man to find a good seedling, but in the end, this girl kept talking about money with him. He was so anxious that his beard was blown up. The steward had an awkward expression. "It's the prize from the Phoenix restaurant. Whoever wins will get it. I'll go and prepare it now." "Little girl, you heard it. Can we continue now?" The old man couldn't be blamed for being so impatient. He wanted to take a closer look to see if he was hallucinating. Yes. Helly and Vivian moved her neck and looked very handsome. This time, she didn't have the laziness from the previous time. Her sharp phoenix eyes looked up and her fingers tapped on the scrap iron as she concentrated on assembling. No one knew that for her reborn self, disassembling weapons was nothing more than the most common of everyday activities. She could successfully disassemble AK-4 within 10 seconds with her eyes closed. Then, she would use another 10 seconds to assemble all the scattered parts back together. She was very familiar with these pieces of scrap iron that were made of an unknown material but had perfect curves. In the 21st century, she played with them every day. She didn't expect that in ancient times, there would also be disassembly and assembly. How could Helly and Wei Wei not be itching to play with them? Gotcha! The second piece was also completed. Moreover, it was successfully fastened with the first piece. The steward opened his eyes wide and looked in the direction of the old man. The old man gripped the teacup in his hand and pressed his hand on the rocking chair as if he wanted to stand up. Gotcha! Gotcha! The third piece. The steward excitedly straightened his neck. Helly and Vivian wasn't affected by the surrounding environment at all. Her hand speed was very fast. It was so fast that it made people dizzy. It could even be said that if they blinked, they would miss her movements. At that moment, the steward only felt that the pair of hands in front of him was unusually slender and beautiful. She didn't look like she was disassembling, but more like she was playing a beautiful song. With every pull, push, and twist, a clear and crisp gotcha sound rang out. Piece after piece of the iron chain was quickly and orderly placed on the stone table. The old man completely stood up. His shocked expression changed. 10 years ago, he took in a talented inner disciple in the Morong manner. After so many years, he was the most talented one. However, even that brat Morong Chang Feng could only disassemble less than 3 pieces. But this girl, 9 pieces, all of them were completed. The old man took a deep breath and raised the teacup in his hand. He wanted to drink a mouthful of water to calm himself down. When he opened his mouth again, he saw Hellion Vivian beautifully turn her hand. Following her movements, all of the iron chains were combined into one, forming a glittering silver line. Whoosh! Hellion Vivian finally twisted her fingers. The silver whip hung down in the wind, as if it could stir up the remaining cherry blossoms in the surroundings. 9 tunes silver snake? The old man couldn't control himself and cried out. His fingers trembled and his mouth couldn't close. He stared at Hellion Vivian with an infatuated expression, as if he had discovered the most precious treasure in the world. How many years had it been? How many years had it been since someone was able to connect so many iron chains together in half an hour? Moreover, she even disassembled these iron chains into a 9-tuned silver snake. This was simply 10 years, no? She was a genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. The old man could almost see that in the near future, this girl would become an absolutely stunning armament master. As long as he thought of this, the old man couldn't help but laugh. That laugh was very mellow and resonant. It carried an unprecedented excitement. Girl, this old man has decided. I want to accept you as my disciple. Hellion Vivian held the long whip in her hand. After hearing this news, she didn't say anything. Her face was indifferent, and one couldn't tell if she was happy or angry. However, the steward at the side looked at Hellion Vivian with astonishment. Seeing that she didn't move, he thought that she was too happy and quickly said, Old Two hasn't accepted a disciple for 10 years. This time, he actually has the idea of accepting a disciple. Young Miss is truly fortunate. If you become a disciple under Old Two's name, you can become a disciple of Lord Morong. Who knows how great your future will be? The old man gently stroked his beard and waved his hand with a smile. However, what he didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian actually said, I refuse. Chapter 10. Hearing this, the manager's expression was so astonished that his jaw almost fell to the ground. The old man also didn't seem to have expected such a result. His entire body froze, his eyes wide open as he stared straight at Hellion Vivian. Why? There's no why. Hellion Vivian unhurriedly put down the long whip in her hand, took the banknotes and left, not caring about the reaction of the people behind her. The old man's expression froze. He clearly still hadn't recovered from the rejection. He didn't know how to describe his current mood. Shock, reluctance, and regret for not being able to obtain such a talent made him suddenly shout in a low voice. Manager Zhang, regarding what you saw today, you can't leak it out? Yes. Manager Zhang promptly nodded. Although he didn't know why Elder Two's expression suddenly became so serious, as the manager of the Phoenix building, the only thing he had to do was to learn how to keep secrets. The old man glanced at the 9-song silver whip on the stone table, bent down and put it away. He then wrapped it in a black cloth and said, Then that's it. You'll take over the rest of the test. I need to go to Grandmaster Zi Zun's place. Manager Zhang looked at the old man's back as he hurriedly left. He was completely stupefied. He was only a manager. He simply didn't know how to distinguish who had martial talent. Elder Two. Manager Zhang jogged all the way and called out. But no matter what, he couldn't call back the old man's gaze. Right now, the old man's mind was only thinking about how to win over that girl. That kind of extraordinary talent was simply a natural martial cultivator. If people from other sects were to find out about this matter, they would definitely rise from all directions. Therefore, he had to find Grandmaster Zizun as soon as possible and properly discuss it. Look, that trash came out. How long did it take? Could it be that Elder Two kicked him out? Haha, that's very possible. Elder Two's temper isn't very good. There were originally few martial cultivators, But this trash still came to join in on the fun. Being kicked out by someone who couldn't bear it is very normal. No matter how much ridicule was thrown at her, Hellion Vivian's expression didn't change in the slightest. She was still as carefree as when she first entered. It was obvious that nothing good would come out of this. Everyone rejoiced in her misfortune, and they were even more certain of what they were thinking. After that, they didn't even look at Hellion Vivian again. She was just a piece of trash, not worth their energy. However, they did not know that the trash they were talking about had already won the assembly order. In the depths of the Dragon War Empire's heart, from the east to the west lay an ancient palace. Inside the palace, there was a fine orchid incense burning and a faint white fog, inducing people to sleep. The palace servant hung up the silver silk curtain, gently opened the incense burner, added some spices with a golden spoon, and then quietly left. Beligaju was lying on his side in a soft, red sandalwood chair with his elbow supporting the back of his head. Along with his posture, his pitch-black long hair draped over his shoulders, hitting the ancient scroll in his left hand. On both sides, delicate and pretty palace maids were crouching by his side, holding fine incense burners. It was just that those palace maids were wearing too thin, and one could faintly see the red undergarments inside. Beligaju sneered, and with a bang, he kicked over the incense burner. "Get out!" That deep voice was extremely cold, resounding in the empty palace hall, bringing along a bone-piercing chill. Those two palace maids glanced at each other, trembling as they staggered to Beligaju's side. With one hand, they tugged at the corner of his robe. "Your Highness, where did this servant do wrong? This servant can change." The woman raised her head. Her small face was the size of a palm. Her pair of watery eyes were sparkling with tears, and her eyelashes were long, like a fan, drooping down. No matter how decent a man was, they couldn't resist this kind of temptation. But Beligaju wasn't just any other man. Just as one of the palace maids was about to take advantage of the situation and soften into his embrace, a silver light flashed. That palace maid's forehead tilted, and frightening wisps of blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. "Get rid of them." Beligaju's voice indifferently gave the order. In less than a quarter of an hour, there wasn't a single extra palace maid left in the palace hall. Shadow, who carried out the order, stood behind Beligaju with a cold ice blade in his hand, his eyes numb as he watched this scene. Bailey Jiaju sneered and unhurriedly untied his sleeves. He threw the robe away and said, "Burn it?" "Yes." Shadow respectfully bowed his head. From the beginning, he already expected this kind of result. His master's outer robe was often not touched by anyone. It seemed that apart from that young lady from the Hellion family, there was still no one who could get close to his master. However, if that young lady didn't have the guts to provoke his master, perhaps his master would have already killed her. The reason why he kept her alive now was completely because of his master's unique interests. Shadow looked at his master's sinister smile, and his hair stood on end. He threw the expensive outer robe into the stove and began to mourn for a certain woman. He hoped that in the future, she wouldn't die too miserably. The fire in the stove was burning brightly when a sound came from outside. "Stinking brat, don't pretend you're not here. This old man knows that you're inside. If you have the ability, then come out for this old man. This old man will accept you as his disciple right now." Shadow heard the commotion outside, and his face had a paralyzed expression of, "No way, they're here again." He hurriedly ordered people to prepare clothes for his master to wear first. Beligaju wasn't in a hurry. He took the outer robe, his fingers turned the sleeves, and buttoned them one by one, not the slightest bit affected by the outside world. "Stinking brat." An old man rushed in from outside, his body draped in a flashy white fur robe. He was still panting. "This old man knew that you would definitely be here." Beligaju didn't pay attention to him, so much so that he didn't even lift his eyelids. However, his eyes were cold, and the old man couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He steadied his breathing and changed to a sincere and earnest tone. "Yesterday, this teacher divined for you. The divination showed that in less than 3 days, you will meet your lives. Hey, don't pull me. If you pull me again, I'll get angry." "Grandmaster." Shadow lowered his voice and gave a meaningful look to the nation's most valued armament master. It wasn't for anything else, but he was afraid that his master would be unhappy and beat someone to death. The old man shook him off, pointed inside the hall, and howled, "Stinking brat." What this old man said is true. When the Red Luan star moves, there will be a great disaster. If you still want to maintain your freedom, immediately acknowledge me as your master. This old man can still help you solve that divination. Go, go. In the hall, a gloomy and dark voice reverberated, as if there were countless sharp and thin ice knives that could cut his throat at any time. It made people tremble with fear. The old man's raised voice immediately withered, and his neck shrank back. Fine. Even if you don't want to acknowledge this old man as your master, you should still come back to the White Academy to cultivate. If you don't come to class, this old man will clear your grades. After he finished speaking, he ran away. In the dark, the eunuchs standing to the side were already covered in cold sweat. They trembled in fear and dropped their hands, not even raising their heads. Seeing the old man leave, Beligaju didn't stop him. He only supported himself with one hand and stood up from the wooden couch. His pure black fur cloak slowly fluttered, and his pair of long and narrow phoenix eyes seemed to have found a trace of joy in this boring life, becoming deeper and deeper, more and more evil. The Red Luan star moves? Ah, this lord wants to see how the dead Red Luan will move. Chapter 11. A gentle breeze blew in, ruffling the man's hair, revealing a pair of thin but frighteningly bright eyes. The eunuchs shivered, chills running down their spines. Master, I beg of you, please don't laugh anymore. This is not your style. Who is it that provoked you? Call her out. We promise not to beat her to death. At this time, Elder Two was standing outside the palace with his hands behind his back, anxiously pacing back and forth. When the old man came out of the palace, his eyes lit up, and he hurriedly greeted him. Grandmaster, you finally came out. It's Tutian. As the Grand Elder of the Imperial Tutor, other than his lack of confidence in front of His Highness, in the eyes of others, he still had a high status. What happened to your armament master assembly? Hearing Grandmaster ask this, Elder Two recalled the scene at the Phoenix Pavilion, his old face flushed red with excitement. I won't hide it from Grandmaster. When I was testing, I discovered a rare genius. Oh, there's such a thing? Grandmaster chuckled, not caring at all. That Morong Chang Feng you've accepted is already not bad. If you get another disciple, Tu Lao, you'll have a perfect life. Unlike this old man, I'm still single. Tu Tian waved his hand. Grandmaster, don't make fun of me. In this Dragon War Empire, who doesn't know how high your standards are? If you lower your standards a bit, who knows how many people would step on your doorstep and break it? Grandmaster smiled, but in his heart, he didn't deny it. He was just being polite. Morong Chang Feng's level of martial artist, in his eyes, was just so. Only, who said that if I lower my standards, the doorstep would be broken? He stepped on other people's doorstep every day, but he didn't see any sign of that stinking brat relaxing his standards, gnashing his teeth. Saying too much would make him cry. No, wrong. That's not what I wanted to say. Tu Lao suddenly remembered his purpose for coming here. He stretched out his hand and pulled the black cloth off the whip. His voice trembled as he said, that girl used less than an hour to dismantle this thing. Compared to her, this old man's new disciple is like heaven and earth. Jizun only saw a flash of silver light in front of his eyes. When he saw the armament clearly, he suddenly stretched out his hand and stared at Tu Lao. The person you were talking about. Where is she now? Where? I don't know either. Tu Lao, who had never seen Jizun show such an expression before, fiercely swallowed his saliva and said, when I arrived, she had already taken the silver and left. Such words did not dampen Jizun's enthusiasm. Then what's her name? Where did you learn from? When Tu Tian heard this, he instantly gritted his teeth and fiercely slapped his own forehead. I was so anxious that I actually forgot to ask for that girl's name. Really, AI? Jizun stared blankly, shaking his head with a bitter smile. Tu Lao, how could you be so muddle-headed at such a crucial time? Even without his old friend's reminder, Tu Lao's heart was filled with regret. While pounding his palm with his fist, he circled around the imperial palace. Jizun lowered his eyes, as if he was talking to Tu Lao, but also as if he was talking to himself. Nine-tuned silver snake, other than that stinking brat. It's hard to find another person in this world who has such a clever mind. This old man really wants to see that girl and accept her as a disciple. What? Tu Lao suddenly raised his head and stared at his good friend with round eyes. Who was Jizun? He was the revered imperial teacher of the Dragon War Empire. The armaments made by his hands were more precious than real gold and silver. It was a treasure that every martial artist longed for. However, he had always been unrestrained, and his whereabouts were casual. Even the emperor couldn't do anything to him. How many people wanted to worship him as a teacher? From the commoners to the martial families, who didn't come with valuable gifts. Yet he didn't even see them once. Just 5 years ago, he had said, in this lifetime, he will only accept one disciple, Beligaju. However, after that, the royal family lost their martial chi. Although they had a posture, it was only for decoration. Naturally, they didn't have the fate to become Jizun's disciple now. He actually said that he wanted to accept another disciple. Who knew if this news would spread out? Would it alarm the entire capital? Bang! Hellion Vivian took a deep breath, feeling the heat flowing from her meridians, spreading from her dantian to her 4 limbs. She didn't make a move, but the formless jet-black gas shattered the rocks by the riverside. Woman, the poison in your body has already been completely removed. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. In a moment, I will help you open up all the sealed meridians. When the time comes, the pain will be 100 times worse than now. Are you sure you can endure it? Speaking up to here, he paused, licking his thin lips with the tip of his tongue. Actually, you can choose the second method. If you give your soul to me, you don't have to do anything. I will personally fulfill all your wishes. Why do you have to suffer like this? Hellion Wei Wei rolled up her sleeves. Her pure white forehead overflowed with a thin layer of sweat. She curved the corner of her mouth. Yuan Xiaoming, put away your ruffian tone of a cowherd picking up girls. I said I'm not that stupid. I won't sell my own soul, and the most important thing is, I want to personally take revenge for myself. Yuan Ming's pupils shook. Then he suddenly laughed. Woman, you are indeed very interesting. He had seen many humans, but none of them could withstand his bewitchment. In the end, they all became his delicious food. And this woman, she was worth watching. Since you have already decided, then I will now begin to help you open up all your meridians. Yuan Ming smiled. But it really hurts. As soon as his voice fell, Hellion Vivian felt as if all the muscles in her body were being cut by a sharp blade. A bone-piercing cold swept across her entire body. The cramping pain caused her thin lips to lose all color. But even if it was so painful, she didn't shout to stop. Instead, her fingers sank into her palms, and she frowned, enduring everything. Until the sharp pain passed, the gentle waves of water moved closer to her, making Hellion Vivian feel extremely comfortable. It was as if her whole body was lying in a huge bathtub, surrounded by water that was neither cold nor hot. It was incomparably comfortable and relaxed. My master, congratulations, you've succeeded. This was the first sentence that Hellion Wei Wei heard after her 5 senses returned to their original position. Following that, it seemed as if there was an endless amount of power flowing out from her blood vessels. Finally, it melted into the palm of her hand, intricate yet complementing each other. A golden light surrounded her, making her look like a star that suddenly rose, emitting a dazzling light. All of this, except for herself, no one else could see. Chapter 12. Because the place that Hellion Vivian chose to cultivate in was the gift that Yuan Ming gave her when they first met, the immortal realm space. Here, there was no noise, only the sound of the flowing stream and the wind blowing through the grass. The environment was very important to a martial artist, and Hellion Vivian, who cultivated in the immortal realm space, improved her martial chi faster than those who cultivated in the depths of the mountains. This was the reason why people often said to cultivate chi with spirit. Hellion Vivian naturally also noticed this side. After narrowing her eyes and pondering for a while, she buried a dying strawberry seedling in the soil. In fact, she was just trying her luck, but what she saw next made Hellion Vivian shocked. She watched as the originally withered seedling seemed to have absorbed enough nourishment, recovering its vitality at a speed visible to the naked eye. It extended its branches and leaves, and even grew small white flowers. Even Yuan Ming, who was at the side, was stunned. Although this immortal realm space was his, he only knew that this place could cultivate martial qi. Since when was it suitable for plants? Holy shit, it actually started to grow fruits. Yuan Ming blinked. The two white ears on his head were stunned. This strawberry really grew a lot. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, reaching out to touch her chin, looking like she thought of something bad. Her eyes were frighteningly bright. Yuan Ming had just shivered, but before he had time to rub his arm, he saw Hellion Vivian take out a banknote from her bosom and directly bury it in the soil. She buried the banknote in the soil. Yuan Ming's pair of silver eyes immediately widened. What the hell is this woman doing? Hellion Vivian didn't speak. Her eyes kept staring at the place where the banknote was buried. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed, 3. Before 3 minutes passed, Hellion Vivian very unhappily pursed her thin lips. So it turns out that it can't grow silver. This space isn't that good. Yuan Ming, you tell me properly, whose immortal realm space is fucking used to grow silver. But the strawberries are actually not bad. Hellion Vivian picked a strawberry and put it in her mouth, throwing the other one to Yuan Ming. Yuan Ming didn't care about her feeding him. His posture was like feeding some kind of dog. His white ears perked up, catching it in his mouth. His mouth was filled with the sweet taste of the strawberry. This strawberry seems to be different from the ones outside. Hellion Wei's eyes flashed as she picked up the strawberries again. Only then did she discover that these strawberries were surrounded by a kind of faintly discernible qi. For a martial artist, this was undoubtedly a great supplement. In other words, the fruits here were not ordinary fruits at all. Instead, they were existences similar to the heavenly mountain snow lotus. With them, even if Hellion Vivian went to White Academy, it was inconvenient to enter the immortal realm space to cultivate. She could still get twice the result with half the effort. At the same time, layers of roses covered the entire hall, making this palace that was buried in the night look like an ancient castle from the 17th century. Under the layers of curtains, there were low-key, luxurious black wood dyed with silver-carved stone pillars. Those stone pillars were erected in picturesque disorder in the 4 directions of east, west, north, and south, as if they could support the entire palace hall. On the main seat of the palace hall, a man lazily reclined, his ascetic robe half open, his long black hair draped over his left and right sides, as if it was dyed with an arrogant ink-black color. His tall and straight ivory nose flashed with the luster of pearls. His slender fingers were wrapped in black gloves, only revealing an inch of porcelain white wrist, attracting people to look again and again. His posture made him look like he was asleep. One hand was lazily supporting the side of his face, while the other hand was lightly resting on the armrest of the throne. His long and narrow eyes were slightly closed, looking very indifferent. However, when a black shadow silently appeared in the room, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were as evil as the night, as if they could see through everything in this world. "Your Highness, the High Priest has come out of seclusion. After hearing about the matter between you and Miss Hellion, he's very..." It seemed that he couldn't find any good adjectives, so Shadow changed the topic. "He's walking over here." The man's pupils were like a cat's eyes, slightly narrowed, emitting a dangerous aura. "Ah, the matter between me and her? What matter could there be between me and her?" Shadow thought his master had forgotten and respectfully said, "Last time when your Highness passed by the Defense Division residence, you helped Miss Hellion get out of trouble." "Get out of trouble?" The man's voice dragged out. The demonic coldness in his eyes directly attacked Shadow. "Are you reminding me right now that I was taken liberties with by a woman?" Shadow's entire body stiffened, swallowing his saliva with difficulty. This subordinate, ah Jew, you're bullying our little Shadow again. You shouldn't, really shouldn't." Suddenly, the palace door slightly opened. A man wearing a dark red cloak slowly walked in, the corners of his mouth carrying a licentious smile. Above the collar of a white fox without a trace of impurities was a face that could topple all living things. A body that was so red that it dripped with blood covered his body. Not only was it not eye-catching, on the contrary, it made his entire person even more charming and handsome. He looked at Beligaju and jokingly opened his mouth. "I heard that you took a fancy to a little kitten?" Beligaju lazily raised his eyes and didn't respond. Instead, he calmly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger, coldly ordering his subordinates, "Go prepare hot water." "Yes." Shadow lowered his eyes and accepted the order. In less than half an hour, a thick layer of hot air soared up in the palace hall. The licentious and unruly man didn't give up on the topic of the little kitten. His thin lips slightly curved, his arm casually placed on Beligaju's shoulder. "I also heard that the little kitten took liberties with you?" Hearing this, Shadow heavily sucked in a breath, not for anything else, but for this man's recklessness. Beligaju coldly smiled and waved his hand away, taking a handkerchief to wipe the place that was touched by the man just now. The corners of his mouth hooked up into a cold arc. "Nangong Lai, you don't want your hand anymore? Hey, don't be impulsive, as the high priest. I need to be concerned about the love life of my country's princes." Nangong Lai immediately took a step back, raising both of his hands to show his innocence. His gaze swept over Beligaju's unfathomably handsome face one by one, as well as the low-key and elegant embroidery on the collar of his long robe. The man in front of him was graceful as if he had been carefully sculpted. Most of the time, his expression was alienated, indifferent, and lazy, even to the extent that he had lost his martial chi. But even so, the innate powerful aura on his body could still suppress any other prince except for him. Beligaju, this man was truly born from the darkness. Even he couldn't figure out his ability, not to mention, he still wasn't sure whether he really didn't have any martial chi. Chapter 13. However, someone who dares to take liberties with you must be very interesting. Only Aju. Nangong Lai still fearlessly raised his eyebrows. "It is said that the kitten was born in the general's residence?" Beligaju tore open the robe on his body, his expression cold. "Are you in seclusion, or are you gathering gossip?" "I am a person who knows everything under the heavens." Nangong Lai blinked his left eye, devilish. "Also, when I am bored, I will help you read a few divinations." Bailey Jiaju picked up the wine glass beside him and swirled it slowly. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry from the side of his handsome face. "If you want to talk about the Red Luan Star, then you can get lost now." "Hee. I knew that old man Jizun would definitely tell you one step ahead of me, but he definitely didn't tell you." Nangong Lai suddenly lowered his voice. The tone of his voice was evil. "That Red Luan of yours is very likely to be that little kitten that flirted with you." Beligaju's hand that was undoing his robe paused. He turned around and slowly walked to the side of the expensive lotus wooden barrel. He expressionlessly glanced at him, his voice cold and carried a warning. "You better not do unnecessary things." Nangong Lai gracefully straightened his body and threw himself into the chaise lounge at the side. He somewhat sleepily yawned and lazily said, "Aju, you can't be being kind and want to let her go, right?" "Let her go? What are you talking about?" Beligaju put his two excessively slender legs on the sandalwood desk in an unruly manner. He reached out and threw his robe to the side. A lock of black hair disobediently fell in front of his eyes. Suddenly, he laughed. His laughter was impudent, revealing a demonic chill that made people tremble. When catching prey, the most important thing is to enjoy the process. If the prey is too easy to get, then there is no meaning, huh? His last two laughs made all the hairs on Nangong Lai's body stand up. This isn't necessary, right? If he is unhappy, he can just kill someone and be done with it. He still wants to slowly torture people. It seems that Aju already planned to use a heavy hand on that kitten. Miss of the Hellion family, you have to hold on. Achoo, achoo, achoo. Hellion Wei Wei's slender fingers rubbed the tip of her nose. She didn't know who was thinking about her, but she sneezed 3 times in a row. Although it was impossible for her to become a genius that everyone envied in a single night, At least she had regained her martial chi. She was no longer the useless trash that she used to be. Hellion Vivian breathed in the fresh air unique to ancient times. Just as she was about to pick a bunch of strawberries from the space to fill her stomach, she heard a harsh sneer coming from the side. Second sister, I heard that a certain person shamelessly went to participate in an armament assembly, and in the end, was chased out by Elder 2 with a dejected face. That scene was truly marvelous. It was Hellion May. As she cut the flowers with scissors, she glanced in Hellion Vivian's direction. Her eyes were filled with disdain. Third sister, Hellion Jiaoer lightly reprimanded. Her jade hand pressed down on Hellion May. This kind of words, you must not say it in front of others. Be careful that someone bites back at you and says that you bullied her. Hellion May's eyes widened. She dares. A trash still wants to show off. Second sister, you don't know, but White Academy has already sent a letter. I think, in less than 3 days, a certain person will be completely expelled from White Academy. She really thinks that because she has the Hellion family's blood flowing in her, she's invincible. Hey, she's just a pile of mud that can't be supported. Unlike second sister, you're the one who's truly talented and emotional. How could that be? Don't talk nonsense. Hellion Jiaoer's mouth was modest, but her eyes were filled with uncontrollable pride. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about how this Hellion Jiaoer could be so pretentious today. When she saw that in a pavilion not far away, there seemed to be a few Chinese men sipping tea. Ah, so it turned out that there were outsiders. How am I talking nonsense? Hellion May's delicate voice called out. Then, she looked at Hellion Vivian with a look of disdain. In my opinion, I'm afraid that a certain person hasn't collected enough money for the hospital fees. She's so poor that she's shabby. Hellion Jiaoer pretended to be puzzled. Mother has never shorted eldest sister's food and clothes. How could she not have money to pay the hospital fees? It's all used on those colorful clothes of hers. Hellion May disdainfully snorted coldly. From beginning to end, Hellion Vivian didn't say a word. She only lazily tossed strawberries with one hand, the corner of her mouth smiling devilishly and coldly. This made the two people who were acting somewhat puzzledly wrinkle their eyebrows. What's the matter with this cheap woman? In the past, she would have already made a scene and made a fool of herself. Why is she so quiet today? Hey, Hellion Vivian, can't you hear us talking to you? Hellion May couldn't help but get angry. Hellion Vivian raised her hand and carelessly blew on her fingers. She slowly said, Third sister, who taught you to talk to me like this? Eldest sister is like a mother. This is such a simple truth, don't you know? Or is it that other than teaching you how to steal other people's husbands, concubine mother didn't teach you anything else? You. Hellion May violently broke the flower in her hand. You cheap woman, do you want to die? How dare you talk to me like this? Hellion Vivian raised her eyes, a cold light flashing in them. Cheap woman? Third sister. When Hellion Jiaoer saw the situation, she quickly pulled Hellion May away and whispered to her. Control your temper. There are still people watching. Hellion May took a deep breath and fiercely glared at Hellion Vivian. You wait for me. See if I don't play you to death. Hellion Vivian lazily yawned. She didn't put Hellion May's threat in her eyes at all. On the other hand, Hellion May was very angry. She threw away the broken flower in her hand and wanted to reach out and beat someone. But before she could raise her arm, she was scared silly by the scene in front of her. Where did these bees come from? Hellion May pulled the servant girl aside. Get rid of them. The servant girl was also scared to death. There were so many bees, densely packed, buzzing and flapping their wings, surrounding Hellion May in the center. It's the flower. The young miss just cut the flower. Who asked you this, My face. Damn the bees. Listening to Hellion May's scream, Hellion Jiaoer also panicked. But she didn't panic to save people. She panicked to hide. There were so many bees. If she was targeted, it would be terrible. In an instant, the entire Imperial Garden of the Defense Division's manor sank into a clamor. Only Hellion Weiwei was calm and unhurried. The surroundings were quiet. Not a single bee could be seen. Yuan Xiaoming, play slowly, too fast, no fun. When Hellion Vivian said this sentence, The corner of her mouth was full of evil charm. Chapter 14. Yuan Ming was extremely excited. Woman, this method of yours is really ruthless, but I like it. Ha! It's good that you like it. Hellion Vivian's tone was indifferent as she withdrew her gaze, turned around, and slowly walked towards her own residence. Yuan Ming rubbed his chin. If they knew that not only were you not kicked out, but you even won 100,000 taels of silver, I wonder what kind of expression those two stupid humans would make? Yeah, who knows? Hellion Vivian licked her thin lips with the tip of her tongue, indescribably evil and bloodthirsty. Yuan Ming propped up the side of his face and laughed. He was looking forward to it. Really looking forward to it. Senior Hellion, this is your family's eldest daughter, right? The one who spoke was a man wearing a large cloak sitting next to Hellion Guangyao. That man was none other than Nangong Lai, who had just come out of seclusion. He lightly turned the white jade teacup in his hand. A trace of playfulness quickly flashed through his eyes. However, the impatient Hellion Guangyao didn't notice this and even thought that Nangong Lai came today to denounce him. His attitude was especially respectful. I've let the high priest see a joke. This little girl of mine has a fierce temper, doesn't understand the rules, and even angered the royal family. According to this old man's opinion, she should be thrown into the dungeon and properly disciplined. Hearing this, Nangong Lai's long and narrow bright phoenix eyes curved into a faint ridicule. Everyone said that Hellion Guangyao was magnanimous and was a rare talent. He really hadn't seen a talent who, in order to protect himself, would push his own daughter into the fire pit. It seemed that rumors really couldn't be trusted. Nangong Lai flicked his sleeve and put down the teacup in his hand, saying, Senior Hellion seems to be oversensitive. His Highness doesn't have any intention of blaming Miss Hellion. That guy always took revenge for the smallest grievance. On the contrary, I just heard Miss Hellion and the others talking. It seems that they mention White Academy. What? Is Miss Hellion also preparing to enter the academy? If that was the case, there would be a good show to watch. He remembered that Aju had also promised to go back. When the time came, Hellion Guangyao didn't understand why Nangong Lai would suddenly smile so devilishly. Hearing him mention White Academy, he instinctively thought that the other party was asking about his beloved daughter, Hellion Mei. He pretended to be modest as he smoothed his beard, yet he couldn't conceal the pride in his words. I didn't expect that even the high priest had heard about this matter. My daughter is untalented, but her good friends in the capital spread the news like wildfire. This old man is truly ashamed. Ashamed. When Nangong Lai heard this, he knew that Hellion Guangyao had misunderstood who the person he was referring to was. However, Nangong Lai didn't explain further. He only smiled evilly as he picked up the teacup again. The corners of his mouth slightly curved up. Misunderstandings weren't important. What was important was that the little kitten who had taken liberties with Aju was going to live in the same courtyard as him. Sure enough, when the red Luan moved, it couldn't be avoided. Things were getting more and more interesting on the other side. In a side courtyard that had been abandoned for a long time, Hellion Vivian looked at the letter that White Academy sent to her on a fast horse after she had paid the money. Her long, shapely eyebrows raised. Notice of admission? What the hell was this? Congratulations, you have already obtained the qualifications to enter White Academy. From today onwards, students who have received this letter are requested to prepare the following items: a white and blue robe, a high-class scholar's hat, as well as a silver fox fur coat and the inkstone writing brush required for admission. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched a few times. What kind of admission notice was this? It was basically instructing them to bring their own school uniform and stationery. For Hellion Vivian, who had once again returned to her student years, it was really funny. White Academy. What a nostalgic name. Yuan Ming sighed at the side with an expression that said, I have a lot of stories. Come and ask me quickly. Hellion Vivian actually gave him face. Her lips curved into a smile as she said, You also know about White Academy? Of course I know. Yuan Ming's arrogant voice was full of pride. Back then, I had crippled many of their students. Hellion Vivian was speechless. This was really a piece of news that was worth being happy about. Bullshit. She had to carefully consider whether to bring Yuan Ming in. She was afraid that someone would not be able to hold back and would impulsively beat Yuan Ming to death. If you go to White Academy, don't forget to mix into their battle spirit forces. That group of guards is still very good. Yuan Ming solemnly instructed Hellion Vivian. She rarely saw him like this and could not help but be interested. Oh, what's good about it? The food is good. Yuan Ming licked the corner of his mouth. I used to go there often. Hellion Vivian was speechless. She must be crazy to think that he was serious. Moreover, I remember that students who enter the battle spirit forces can be exempted from those admission fees. Yuan Ming held his chin and narrowed his eyes as he recalled. Hellion Vivian suddenly raised her head and the corner of her mouth brought out a smile. It is indeed a good group of guards. Let's go. Yuan Ming's mouth twitched. Don't tell me that you are aiming for their exemption from the admission fees. Compared to you who is only interested in their food, my pursuit is much higher. Hellion Vivian lazily pinched a strawberry and put it in her mouth, asking, What kind of guards are they? Let me understand first. Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows and looked at her evilly. I guess it is useless even if you understand. Why? Hellion Vivian smiled lightly. You don't believe in my strength? Yuan Ming shook his finger. This has nothing to do with strength. This army is very mysterious. They are not controlled by anyone and can even disobey the emperor's command. In addition to their amazing talent, they also value personal cultivation very much. In the Divine Continent, no one knows who they are, but all the empires know that they are hidden in White Academy. Maybe they are the old people who clean the academy, or maybe they are the masters who teach martial qi. And the people they choose are usually the famous nobles in the capital. What about you? As far as I know, your father is not very good to you. Hellion Vivian laughed softly. When she turned her head, her eyes lit up. Yuan Ming, have you heard of a saying from us humans? What? Yuan Ming looked up. Hellion Vivian slowly said word by word. 10 years to the east, 10 years to the west, 10 years to the east, 10 years to the west, mo. Lie. Little. Years. Poor. At that moment, it was as if all the brilliance was concentrated on her body. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind, bright in the sky. Yuan Ming looked at the girl standing in front of him. The blood in his body seemed to have been ignited. He couldn't help but admit that perhaps being contracted was not a bad thing. At dusk, a light breeze brushed past. In order to buy the things mentioned in the admission notice, Hellion Vivian left early in the morning, throwing strawberries in her hand. As an unfavored young lady, there were advantages. At least she was free, and no one cared about her. She didn't know if it was because she was about to enter the academy, but those young masters and young ladies driving the carriages all bought a pile of expensive robes and tall hats. So much so that several cloth stores were out of stock and out of stock. Hellion Vivian strolled for a long time, but still couldn't buy what she wanted. She planned to rest first, but before she could walk to the Phoenix Inn, a carriage blocked her way. Chapter 15. That carriage was luxuriously built. It was a transparent white, and one could faintly see a large flash of gold. It was completely out of the ordinary. My eyes aren't playing tricks on me, right? A good-for-nothing also came out to buy a hat? Hellion May, who had just been bitten by a bee, had just come down from the carriage and opened her eyes wide. Her mouth mocked, Father, quickly come and see. Eldest sister also wants to enter White Academy. Don't know if she will be driven out or not. Hellion Guang Yao also came out of the carriage. After seeing Hellion Vivian, he fiercely wrinkled his thick eyebrows, as if he felt disgusted just by looking at her. What are you still standing here for? Don't you feel ashamed? Go back. Father, calm down. Hellion Jiaoer looked up with teary eyes. Eldest sister, why did you chase us here? Is it because Lord is also with us? Murong Changfeng, who was standing at the side, his robe fluttered in the wind. He turned his eyes and swept past that slightly dark-skinned girl. He slowly knitted his eyebrows and couldn't hide his disgust. This Lord also wants to know what is going on. In my opinion, eldest sister followed Lord here, simply like a ghost that won't leave. She didn't even think about what she had done. Which man would fancy her? Unless he is blind. Hellion May's ridiculing voice was loud and wanton. Almost everyone on the street looked over. Hearing that last sentence, Shadow, who was far away, coughed heavily. His forehead was full of cold sweat as he looked at the side of his master's face. The man slowly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. Not the slightest bit of happiness or anger could be seen in his deep, icy eyes. Buddha bless, His Highness didn't hear that sentence. He definitely didn't hear. Bullshit. That woman had shouted blind, so loudly that even he had heard it. How could his master not have heard it? I say, eldest sister, don't tell me you still haven't given up on Lord? Hellion May glanced at her. Wake up, will you? The person that the heir likes is second sister. How can you compare to second sister? You've been out for so long, but you haven't bought anything. Could it be that you don't have enough money? Haha, if you have the time, you should look at yourself in the mirror and see how poor you look. Don't always think about flying up to become a phoenix all day long. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest. She didn't say a word from the beginning until Hellion May closed her mouth. Then, she slowly raised the corner of her mouth. Are you done? What Hellion May couldn't stand the most was her indifferent attitude towards everything. She snorted coldly. Since you're done talking, let me do the talking. Hellion Wei took a step forward, the corners of her mouth faintly discernible smiling. Then, she suddenly bent down, extended her hand and pinched Hellion May's chin. Who told you that I followed you here? I'm only going out to buy something. Aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? As for Murong Changfeng, you should quickly take him away. A trash man with only a lower body and no brain. Just looking at him makes me sick. How dare you say that about Lord? Hellion May's whole body trembled as she angrily pointed at Hellion Vivian. Murong Changfeng was so angry that his entire handsome face was distorted. What did this damned woman say about him? A trash man with only a lower body and no brain? He didn't know who was the one that followed behind his, but all day long. Now that she's doing this, is she using another method to attract him? If that's the case, then he really had to congratulate this idiot waste. She did it. Right now, Murong Changfeng hated that he couldn't kill Hellion Vivian with a sword. He had never hated a person so much like this before. Lord, Hellion Jiaoer discovered that ever since that slut appeared, all of Murong Changfeng's attention had been attracted away. How could this be? She extended her hand and tugged at Murong Changfeng's sleeve. She lightly bit her thin lips. Her eyes were red and pitiful. I beg Lord Murong to not argue with eldest sister. She only doesn't want to part with Lord Murong and wants Lord Murong to change his mind. In this lifetime, this lord will never marry a trash who doesn't know shame. Murong Changfeng disdainfully sneered. The side of his face was like an ice sculpture in Taibai Mountain, smelly and hard. Hellion Vivian didn't care about his reaction at all. Her left hand tossed the strawberry, letting the ridicule come from behind her. In the distance, the man's black and white eyes looked up, reflecting a small, indifferent face. That face was calm, unhurried, and mischievous. It was a world of difference from the previous incompetence. Under the silver mask, the man's delicate thin lips revealed an evil smile. Hellion Vivian, you're really interesting. Seeing that you're so interesting, this lord will let you stay for a few more days. Such an interesting prey. If played to death too early, then it would be boring. Your Highness? Shadow shook off the goosebumps on his body. Oh my God, Master, can you not laugh anymore? Where are you unhappy? Just say it directly. Let's go. The man indifferently threw out a word. His long sleeves floated in the air, his back like a pine tree. Shadow stared blankly. Go? Didn't he say he was going to kill that Hong Wan today? Did His Highness change his mind again? According to his former master's habits, the later he took care of a person, the more miserable that person's fate would be. Shadow glanced back, then glanced at Hellion Wei on the long street, and silently mourned for the other party. On the other side, Murong Changfeng's anger still hadn't subsided as he brought Hellion Jiaoer and the others into the inn. The reason why they went out together today was because Murong Changfeng wanted to introduce Hellion Jiaoer to his master, Master Tu Lao. Tu Lao saw his own disciple push open the door and enter with a face full of anger. He frowned. Changfeng, how many times has Master said that if you want to become a successful martial cultivator, Cultivation is very important, and your state of mind is also very important. Yes. Murong Changfeng clenched his hands. Although he was somewhat unconvinced, he was still obedient. How could Tu Lao not see it? But he didn't point it out. This disciple of his was good at everything, just that he was a bit arrogant and couldn't listen to other people's teachings. Maybe it was because his background was too good, Sai. Not like that girl yesterday. Indifferent, neither servile nor overbearing, just a bit of love for money. Thinking of this, Tu Lao was somewhat regretful. Okay, let's not talk about this. The person I asked you to find for Master, did you find it? Murong Changfeng shook his head and said, this disciple searched the entire capital, but still couldn't find the girl that Master was talking about. Master, who is this person in the end? Is it worth it for you to care so much? An exceptional genius. Speaking of that girl, Tu Lao couldn't help but be excited. You don't know how high her martial cultivation talent is. Even Grandmaster Zizun wants to take her as a disciple and personally teach her. What? Murong Changfeng raised his head. A trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. Previously, he also wanted to worship that old man as his master, but no matter if he personally went to visit, or if his father, Prince Murong, sent a carriage to invite him, that eccentric, arrogant old man didn't even see them once. But now, that old man actually wanted to take in a disciple. He was very curious. Who exactly was it that entered his eyes? Chapter 16. Lord, who is the young girl you're talking about? Unable to stand the other side ignoring her for so long, the Hellion Jiaoer opened her mouth sweetly. Maybe my father can help look for her. Murong Changfeng then remembered that Hellion Guangyao was still in the inn and quickly introduced him. Master, this is Lord Hellion, who is in charge of the military. Isn't the high priest always in charge of the military? Can a different person manage it? Tu Tian still wanted to find the person, so he didn't think much and asked. Hellion Guangyao's smiling face stiffened. Even his words were somewhat forced. This official is only an assistant. I've met the great master once before. This time, Lord brought this official to find the great master in hopes that the great master would accept my daughter as a disciple. At this time, Tu Tian realized that he had misspoken, so it wasn't good to directly reject Hellion Guangyao's request. He only patted his own head and said, look at this brain of mine. It's getting worse and worse. I'm getting old. I forget the people I've met in the blink of an eye. Then what about my daughter? Hellion Guangyao asked tentatively. Tu Tian looked at the Hellion Jiaoer standing behind him. Since she's recommended by my disciple, her aptitude must be extraordinary. Hearing this, the Hellion Jiaoer's face revealed an unconcealable pride. Another vain person. Tu Tian shook his head and continued, to tell the truth, I only want to accept that young girl as a disciple right now. As for the others, forget it. The Hellion Jiaoer, who had never been rejected by anyone, her eyes flashed with a trace of venom. Could that young girl compare to her? However, even if she thought so, the Hellion Jiaoer wouldn't show it on her face. She only smiled. Jiaoer really wants to see the elder sister that the great master mentioned. Haha, I also want to see that girl one more time. Unfortunately, I only know that she's about 15 or 16 years old. I don't know anything else. That girl seems to have vanished from the face of the earth. Look at the cloth she's wearing. She should be from some family's young miss. Why can't I find her? Tu Lao muttered to himself endlessly. No matter how he thought about it, it wasn't that Hellion Vivian had disappeared from the world, but rather that from the very beginning, Murong Changfeng had already excluded Hellion Vivian. So even if he searched the entire capital, he still wouldn't be able to find that genius from the Phoenix Pavilion that day. The next day, the sun was high in the sky and the wind was refreshing. Countless luxurious carriages left the city. The scene was extremely grand. There was not a single person in the capital who did not know that today was the opening day of the White Academy. The young ladies of the aristocratic families were all dressed up meticulously. Only Hellion Vivian was wearing her usual clothes. She carried a small backpack and was ready to set off. When they were leaving, Hellion Mei wrinkled her eyebrows in disgust. She turned her head and shook Hellion Guangyao's arm. Father, you shouldn't be thinking of letting my second sister sit in the same carriage as her, right? That poor and pedantic appearance, if it was seen by others, how would my second sister and I make friends in the academy? This carriage simply doesn't have a share of that wicked girl. Hellion Guangyao patted Hellion Mei. When we arrive at the academy, you and your second sister can just pretend that you don't know her. Yes, father. Hellion Mei smiled sweetly and looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian, complacently glancing at her. Hellion Vivian didn't pay attention to her. Rather than wasting time here, it would be better to hurry on with their journey. This father of yours is really a beast. They are both daughters, but they are sitting in the carriage, yet you want to walk up the mountain by yourself. Yuan Ming's voice sounded as if he had just woken up, still carrying a lazy hoarseness. Hellion Vivian indifferently raised her eyebrows. Yuan Ming, don't use that scum man to insult a beast. A beast will cry to death. So full of breath. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. Looks like you advanced again yesterday. Hellion Vivian's mouth curved, but didn't deny it. Yuan Ming looked excited. Then let's go quickly. When we arrive at White Academy, we'll kill them all. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Just how much did this person like to fight and kill? Did he think that the grudge with White Academy wasn't deep enough? Second sister, look at what that good-for-nothing is wearing. It's really funny. Hellion Mei lifted the carriage's curtain, her face full of ridicule. Hellion Jiaoer let a maid change her hair ornament and also looked outside the carriage's curtain. Her eyes flashed and said, Then does third sister want to make her look even funnier? Of course I do. Hellion Mei immediately turned around. Second sister, do you have any good ideas? Hellion Jiaoer smiled faintly. I heard that White Academy's closing time is fixed. Once the closing time is over, White Academy will be completely isolated from the outside world. As long as we arrive at the academy before that good-for-nothing, we can block the door she wants to go through. Let's see how she can enter the academy then. Isn't it a little too light? Hellion Mei still couldn't forget the slap she received 2 days ago. Her eyes darkened. It's best to completely cut off that slut's path. Hellion Jiaoer smiled and said, Third sister, did you not read the admission notice properly? The notice says that if you don't enter the academy by the time you arrive, you will be permanently disqualified from entering the academy. Then this time Hellion Vivian, that slut, is dead meat. Hellion Mei laughed maliciously, echoing in the carriage for a long time. Noon, halfway up the mountain, Hellion Vivian looked at the huge rock blocking the door, her eyebrows wrinkled. How can there be a rock here? Yuan Ming raised his head doubtfully. Such a big rock doesn't look like it rolled down from the mountain. Hellion Vivian circled around the huge rock, her eyes slightly cold. From inside, she drew out a red line. You're right. This rock really didn't roll down from the mountain. Someone deliberately put it here. It's your two stupid sisters again. Yuan Ming was helpless. Why do they like to provoke you so much? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Jealous that I'm too handsome? You're a woman, not a man. Thank you. Yuan Ming lazily laid down on the huge rock. What do we do now? I'm an incorporeal body, and your martial chi cultivation isn't enough. With such a big rock blocking the way, how are you going to enter? Woman, I have to remind you that you don't have much time left. If you don't push this rock away, you will be locked out of the academy forever. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled evilly. Who said that if I want to enter the academy, I have to go through the door? Yuan Ming was speechless. Hey, woman, don't hug me so tightly. Are you climbing over the wall, or are you molesting me? Shut up. Yuan Ming's arrogant and irritable voice resounded all around. Wei Wei only cared about lowering her head and threatening him. She completely didn't think to confirm what was going on below the wall. Then, without any hesitation, she jumped down. Crash. Hellion Wei Wei directly smashed into a hard object. Chapter 17. There seemed to be something a little strange, especially the sensation on her lips. It was ice cold and had a familiar minty fragrance, so soft that it penetrated her heart. It felt like she was eating vanilla-flavored Häagen-Dazs ice cream. No, how could there be ice cream in this place? Hellion Vivian hurriedly opened her eyes and found herself in a man's embrace. What was even stranger was that the two of them were even kissing each other. Shadow, who was standing at the side, saw the sudden situation and his mouth opened into an O shape. For a moment, his thoughts were in a mess and he actually forgot to speak. He also forgot to pull his highness up and could only stand there with a dumbstruck expression. His entire body was petrified. Wasn't this the Pong Luan that Master had always wanted to kill? Why did she climb over the wall and even kiss Master without any regard for her life? Hellion Vivian was just about to say, wasn't it just a kiss? She, the main character, is already so calm. Why is the person beside her so exaggerated? However, the man who was being pressed down ruthlessly pushed her to the side as if he was pushing away a harmful germ. At this moment, Hellion Vivian finally saw the man's appearance clearly. His lips hung a cold smile that could make even heaven and earth lose their countenance. His hair was suffused with a sinister black color, and his thick eyelashes were filled with bewitchment. His slightly curled eyelashes even had a faint silver tint to them. His white and tall nose bridge was like an ancient jade and ivory, and his lips were very light and pure, shining with a pearl luster. It could easily cause others to have the desire to kiss him. His broken lips even brought out this uninhibited sexiness to the extreme. That drop of blood stained his thin lips. Especially when matched with that ascetic face, it was simply breathtaking. However, there was one thing that wasn't perfect. That was the way the man looked at her, as if he had suffered a great loss. Was there a mistake? Generally speaking, shouldn't the woman be at a disadvantage in this kind of matter? Furthermore, this was her first kiss. What was there to be dissatisfied about? However, if she had such a face that could turn all living things upside down, she would also be dissatisfied. After all, she was in the wrong first. Without even looking, she jumped down from the wall and hit him. Furthermore, cough cough, she forcefully kissed him. That's right, it was a forced kiss. She, Hellion Vivian, had done many immoral things in her life, but she had never felt as guilty as she did now. Moreover, this man was obviously a perfectionist who was slightly obsessed with cleanliness. At this moment, his face was gloomy, and his originally bottomless black eyes were even more unfathomable. They were full of dark and thick hostility, and it was so oppressive that it was almost suffocating. It was the dark aura that only kings who had been immersed in high positions for a long time would have. Therefore, she should take advantage of the fact that they haven't reacted and run away quickly. Hellion Vivian picked up the small school bag on the ground and planned to leave. But before she could take a step forward, she was picked up by the man behind her like a chicken. His gloved left hand grabbed the back of her collar, and his voice was cold. "Where are you going?" Was this woman trying to run away as if nothing had happened after forcing a kiss on him? Heh! She was simply acting recklessly. Thinking of this, Beligage's eyes became even colder. Every year, there would be many new students entering the school. That guy, Nangong Lai, knew that he liked peace, so he secretly arranged for him to stay in this courtyard. In the end, as soon as he arrived, he saw a small school bag fly down from the wall, and then it was this woman. Beligaju turned his head, and his thick eyebrows wrinkled, as if he was thinking of how to deal with this little thing in his hand. Then, he slowly opened his mouth. "You have to take responsibility." "Why is that so?" Hellion Vivian thought that she had misheard, and even stuttered when she spoke. The man's deep eyes were still in the same posture as before, and he stared at her indifferently. Rather than saying that he was staring, it was more like he wanted to tear her apart. Hellion Vivian raised both of her hands, indicating that the two of them should stop fighting. The corners of her mouth rose into an evil smile. "All right, how do you want me to take responsibility? Don't tell me you want to give yourself to me?" Hearing this, Shadow, who had just recovered from the previous scene, stiffly sucked in a breath of air. This woman, what did she just say? Make His Highness give himself to her? Guanyin Bodhisattva, Buddha, quickly show your spirit. Quickly make this woman who doesn't play by the rules shut up. He really didn't want to see His Highness's hands stained with blood on the first day of entering the school. Give yourself to me? Nangong Jiaju playfully pinched Hellion Wei Wei's chin. The tips of his fingers slowly rubbed against her lips until they were boiling hot. His icy cold breath sprayed all over her face. "Since you want to devote yourself to me, shouldn't you check the goods, The hoarse and deep male voice fell beside her ear, causing her to inexplicably tremble. "Go prepare a room." These words were said to Shadow at his side. Shadow's eyes widened in disbelief. In his impression, His Highness had never taken the initiative. Usually, it was those women who stuck to him, and he always disdained them. But today, Shadow shook his head, turned around and left. He must be thinking too much. The reason why His Highness wanted a room was nothing more than to find a clean place to bury the corpse. Yes, it must be like this. Otherwise, he really couldn't figure out what His Highness saw in that woman. Was it that jet-black skin like rice crust? Hellion Vivian looked at the other person's face that was even more shocked than hers, and more or less felt somewhat displeased. What did this guard mean? Did he think that she wasn't good enough for his master? Although she still hadn't wiped her face clean, at the very least, she could be considered to have delicate features. If she stood in the middle of black people, her skin would be as white as snow. Wasn't there almost no comparison for her? Besides, the person who was going to be dragged down to XXO was her, not him. Why did he have to look like he had seen a ghost? Hellion Vivian listened to Shadow's footsteps as he left. Her small face was buried at the side, and her shrewd eyes spun around, overflowing with a little bit of brilliance. What's wrong? The man pinched her chin and lifted it up, forcing her to look at his handsome face. His thick eyebrows, straight nose, thin lips that held a smile, all set off his pair of deep black eyes. The rest of his facial features were hidden in the shadows, and that pair of eyes attracted most of the attention. "Do you want to go back on your words?" When he spoke, his slender fingers slowly slid to her neck, and then he tightly gripped it, as if as long as she nodded once, he could immediately kill her. Hellion Vivian charmingly smiled, and used the only arm she could move to take the initiative to wrap around the man's lean waist. Her small face slightly raised. "I'm afraid that you'll regret it." "Oh?" The man slightly narrowed his eyes, and playfully looked at the little thing in his arms who wasn't afraid of death. The dangerous and evil smile on the corner of his mouth deepened. Chapter 18. Now is the time. Hellion Vivian took advantage of the moment when the man was distracted and twisted her arm skillfully. Like a loach, she used the reaction force to escape from his grip. However, he didn't move at all. Instead, he even controlled her movements and grabbed her slender waist. Hellion Vivian smiled. What she was waiting for was his counterattack. Her long legs were nimble, and she didn't slow down in the slightest as she bent her knees and arched upwards in a handsome manner. Beligaju's movements paused. In order to protect that important part, he could only temporarily release his grip on Hellion Vivian's hand. However, it wasn't over yet. When Beligaju stopped in his tracks, his handsome face suddenly sank. His deep and narrow eyes suddenly turned cold. "Is there poison on your hand? I also don't want to use such a despicable move." Hellion Vivian indeed felt a little guilty. The key was her big brother. She only kissed him once, and he wanted to XXO her. This was too much. Cough, cough. "Don't look at me like that." Hellion Vivian had a feeling that she was bullying an innocent young man. After thinking for a while, she took out a banknote. "I'll use this as payment for kissing you." After seeing the banknote, Beligaju's long and narrow eyes fiercely narrowed. His strange gaze was like a gorgeous yet cold creature swimming in it. This made Hellion Wei only feel a burst of coldness on her back. She rather uncomfortably grabbed her own long hair, added another banknote, and slapped it in his hand. "I can't give you more. In modern times, even those male prostitutes don't pay as much as you do." Even if Beligaju had never heard of the word male prostitute, he could more or less guess what it meant. "Good, very good." Suddenly, the man laughed, his voice wanton. "You better pray that I won't find you in this lifetime, or else." Hellion Vivian shook off the goosebumps on her body. She didn't want to listen anymore. She jumped up onto the branch. As her black hair fluttered in the wind, she could vaguely hear her clear voice. "Handsome man, we won't meet again." Beligaju watched as her figure gradually disappeared into the distance. Both of his hands slowly slipped into his cloak. His proud head drooped down, and the strands of hair on his forehead covered his eyes, revealing only that devilish smile. The corners of his mouth curled up wantonly, spreading to the side of his sexy face. His entire body was filled with a wanton and unrestrained aura. Then, he flipped his palm, and two pure and mellow true qis, one yin and one yang, flowed smoothly through the meridians of his entire body. Not long after, the frozen feeling in his dantian disappeared. He slowly exhaled and opened his eyes. His eyes were cold and filled with shocking danger. The corners of Beligaju's mouth curled up lazily. His left hand casually played with the flint, while his right hand held the two banknotes. His eyes congealed into frost. The flint was very beautiful. It was pure black in color and cold in his hand. With a black head and green flame, it was indeed very cool to use it to light a cigarette. But he used it to count money. The banknotes ignited when they came in contact with the fire. Beligaju looked at the flower in his hand and coldly laughed. 20 taels, that's really a lot. The man's voice was as cold as winter. That king's aura actually caused the temperature of the entire courtyard to drop. 20 taels. When did he, the grand third prince of the Dragon War Empire, become so cheap? Beligaju half raised his eyebrows. His thin lips blew at the ashes on his fingertips. At that moment, he looked like a demon king that came from the banks of the river of forgetfulness. Naturally, he killed in one breath. Suddenly, rumbling sound came from the distance. Nangong Lai, wearing a long fur robe, walked out from the stone dust that filled the sky. He unhappily curled his thin lips. Who is so blind as to put a stone in front of the courtyard and have to trouble me to do it? Hey, Aju, quickly come over and see if my body is dirty or not. Beligaju glanced sideways and slowly glanced at him. That glance was extremely cold. Coupled with his action of blowing the ashes, it was indescribably frightening. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb as he swallowed his saliva. What's going on? Logically speaking, no one would come to this courtyard to provoke this king of hell. Who was Aju's murderous look directed at? Was it him? At this time, Shadow, who went to prepare the room, flew back and landed on one knee. Master, go find her for me. Beligaju threw away the cloak on his body. His black hair fiercely oppressed people's hearts. Shadow, who sensed that something was wrong, immediately lowered his head. Other than saying yes, he didn't dare to say another word of nonsense. But there were some people who weren't afraid of death, such as a certain wanton and unrestrained man. Nangong Lai devilishly put his hand on Nangong Jiaju's shoulder. All right, don't be unhappy. Big Brother will tell you a piece of good news. That kitten is also on the admission list. When an Ing heard the words kitten, he felt a heavy jolt in his back. High Priest, I'm begging you, don't mention that woman again. Master will really kill you by accident. Sure enough. Nangong Ju stopped the movement of his hand and raised his head with difficulty. That kitten? It's the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. Nangong Lai said excitedly. He didn't look carefully just now, but now that he was closer, he discovered. Aju, what happened to your mouth? It's like you were bitten by someone. Ha ha ha, too funny. You're someone who can't even get half a step closer to a woman, and your lips are even broken. Ha ha ha. Nangong Lai held his stomach, laughing until his entire body was somewhat swaying. But gradually, he couldn't laugh anymore, not because of anything else, but because of the golden blade that was close at hand. Nangong Lai looked at Shadow, who was continuously winking at him, then looked at Beligaju's handsome face with a smile that wasn't a smile. His mouth opened wide in a split second. It can't be? I guessed correctly. You really were. If you dare to say that word, I will take your life. Beligaju leisurely interrupted him. The angle of his chin raised was demonically cold and arrogant. Nangong Lai lightly coughed twice, using a kind of experienced tone. Aju, you don't need to care too much about this matter, and you don't need to keep using pear blossom water to rinse your mouth. You're a man. You have to go through this process. However, I'm still very curious. Who in the world has such big guts, even daring to take advantage of you? If there was time, he must properly get to know this capable person. He simply couldn't do better. What do you think? Beligaju slowly retracted his hand. That golden blade actually followed his movements, transforming into strands of golden light, finally blending into the afterglow of the setting sun. Nangong Lai was very smart. Thinking left and right, he became excited. It's that kitten again? What about her? Where is she? You can go ask them. Beligaju pointed at the ashes of the remaining half of the banknote, his expression cold. Money? Nangong Lai squatted down with a strange expression. What's going on? Chapter 19. It's very obvious. Beligaju paused for a moment, slowly tidying up his sleeves. His handsome side profile didn't reveal any emotions. I've been prostituted. Nangong Lai. Ha 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 ha. Nangong Lai laughed until his entire body was shaking. His finger pointed at Beligaju. Ju, you must find her. This is really too interesting. Ha ha ha. Where did you find such an interesting woman? Beligaju acted as if he didn't hear his laughter. He casually raised his hand. In an instant, Nangong Lai's entire body couldn't move. Only his mouth couldn't stop laughing. Hey, 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 Ju. You can't do this to me. Damn it. Didn't you lose your martial chi? How can you even use the body snatching technique? Also, did you hit my laughing acupoint through the air? You sinister man. Beligaju supported his chin, lazily looking at him. Behind him was the reclining chair that Shadow had prepared for him. In his hand was a freshly brewed tea, completely unaffected by the surrounding noise. His posture was quite enjoyable. Nangong Lai was tired of talking, but he couldn't stop laughing. Ju, didn't you hear what I said just now? That little cat is also on the admission list. If you let me go now, maybe I can help you find her. I'm the vice principal. Beligaju's hand paused in the middle of drinking tea. He glanced back at him. His demonically cold, thin lips slowly curved up. Woman, you seem to have provoked an incredible character. Once they were far away, Yuan Ming couldn't help but open his mouth. His voice was thick with the feeling of watching a good show. Hellion Vivian sighed deeply, her body lying on the lawn, both hands behind her head, a piece of hay in her mouth. I don't need you to tell me. Chi. Yuan Ming looked at the sun that was about to set, rubbing his hands. Although the environment here is not bad, shouldn't you get up and gather in the main courtyard? Don't forget about our business of fighting and killing. Who takes fighting and killing as a career like you? Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. She lowered her head and glanced at what she was wearing. Yuan Xiaoming, I warn you, I haven't bought a silver cloak yet. You'd better be honest later. We'll stand in the middle to reduce our presence. The White Academy was so big that the number of people in it was comparable to a modern aristocratic high school. When those young masters and young ladies who had entered the courtyard gathered together, it was enough to drown her in a sea of people. Even if that man wanted to look for her, it would be of no use. Hellion Vivian's guess was correct. There were indeed a lot of students pouring into the main entrance from every courtyard. It was to the extent that even when Nangong Lai and Beligaju were mixed in the middle at the same time, they were not discovered. Hey, Ju, do we have to go in like this? Nangong Lai pulled on the top hat on his head and said in a sloppy manner, Today, I will be attending as the vice dean. If I'm not on time, Imperial Grandfather will find trouble with me. Beligaju put on the last outer garment. His eyebrows were handsome. How many people know that you're this year's vice dean? Only you and Imperial Grandfather know. A person must maintain a sense of mystery. Nangong Lai blinked his left eye. He had always been unrestrained by the secular world. He had never worn such a formal outer garment. He simply didn't wear it. He swung his hand and put it on his shoulder. Long legs and slim waist, very handsome. Beligaju calmly took back his hand and put it into his outer garment pocket. His voice was indifferent, then continued to maintain it. You mean to say? Nangong Lai narrowed his eyes. We have to enter the academy as new students? Beligaju didn't speak. He only looked up and smiled. Nangong Lai suddenly covered his forehead. Ju, are you crazy? A priest and a prince mixed in with new students. What kind of appearance was that? You must be crazy. Nangonglai nodded with certainty. He was kissed silly. Beligaju brushed his sleeves and said in a cold voice, "Less nonsense. Are you going or not?" "I can't go. High Priest, you must stop His Highness." Standing at the side, Shadow desperately gave Nangonglai a look. His facial paralysis made his facial features distort. "Of course I'm going." Nangonglai looked towards Ning, who was working so hard, and smiled evilly. He took the lead in taking a step forward. "Aju, I'm telling you, in a while, you must remember to protect me well. Even though everyone doesn't know me, but with brother's handsome face, I'm sure those pretty girls from small families who don't step out of the house will be unable to control themselves. If they want to come up and shake my hand, you must avoid them. Do you understand?" Shadow was speechless. Avoid them? High Priest, are you afraid that His Highness will steal your limelight? In terms of appearance, His Highness is more dangerous. No, this isn't the main point. The main point is His Highness. Do you really intend to go in like this? What should he do? Should he go and inform the retired emperor? No. Based on the retired emperor's pampering of His Highness, he would at most laugh and say, "Old Third is still so naughty." Naughty? Shadow looked at the sky, tears streaming down his face. In the whole world, only the retired emperor would think that Master was naughty, and not that he would kill demons if demons blocked him, gods if gods blocked him. At dusk, a long wind blew gently. White Academy was located on top of a mountain. The north was leaning against the mountain, the south was a river, and the east was a verdant bamboo forest. There were tree stumps in the forest, and hot spring water was used to irrigate the forest. All year round, the scenery was like spring, and the mist was faintly discernible. It was like a fairyland. At this time, there were already many people in the center of the courtyard. Helly and Vivian followed the flow of people and looked over. There were several young masters from aristocratic families who were in the process of displaying their martial chi. They were modest and courteous, and they were proud of their strength. And at the back, under the shade of the trees, there were many luxurious chairs. The servants hung water jugs and were shouting noisily, cheering for their masters. The young ladies were much more reserved. They sat under the shade of the trees and tasted pastries and tea. The maids were busily running up and down at the side. "They're coming! They're coming!" Suddenly, someone shouted. Those young masters and young ladies all stopped what they were doing and looked in the direction of the stone door. Creak! The tightly shut stone door slowly opened, and a little person walked out. He was about 5 or 6 years old. His 2 short legs swayed back and forth, and it was estimated that he couldn't reach the ground even if he sat on the chair. The white training clothes hung loosely on his body and were tightly tied by a pure black belt, making him appear even more petite. His big bald head was even brighter than a mirror under the sun. At this moment, the little bald head seemed to be sulking at someone. He puffed up his chubby cheeks and silently stared at the new students under the stairs. He fiercely took a bite of the meat bun in his hand and heavily sighed like a little adult. "It's all because of you guys. Before I could eat my fill, Master kicked me out. Too hateful." Chapter 20. Everyone was stunned. What kind of situation was this? "I don't care." Little bald head chewed the meat bun in his mouth and said in a dignified manner, "Anyway, if you want to gather, you have to go through me first." When the aristocratic young masters heard this, they all burst into laughter. "How can a baby like you stop us? Ha ha ha. Little brother, you better go back quickly. Fists and feet have no eyes." The noble young ladies used their handkerchiefs to cover their mouths, looked at each other, and finally laughed. Little bald head's bun-like face tightened. To show his seriousness, "I can stop them, but I can't stop them. We'll know after we fight. Then I'll play with little brother." One of the aristocratic young masters swaggered over and was just about to stretch out his hand to pick up little bald head, only to hear a bang sound. Little bald head raised his leg high, and with a beautiful flying turn, he kicked that aristocratic young master several meters away. Everyone suddenly took a deep breath, and then one after another, they threw themselves at little bald head. In the end, All of them were beaten back. Wei Wei looked at little bald heads' raised hands. The corners of her eyes imperceptibly jumped a bit. That lotus root-like fleshy wrist wore a simple metal ring. With one look, an expert would know that it had a very pleasant-sounding scientific name, called gravity buckle. The gravity buckle on little bald head's hands wasn't small at all. Wearing this plaything, he was still able to knock down so many people. Ah, it seems that the legendary White Academy was indeed a galaxy of talents and shouldn't be underestimated. Only, no one knew why little bald head suddenly stopped his original movements, and his big round eyes stared in disbelief at a certain place, adorably in a daze. Hellion Vivian curiously followed his gaze, and when she saw it, her heart almost jumped out. Damn it, why was it that man? The crowd slowly parted. The man first stepped out with a stiff and straight long leg, and then he casually walked out from the crowd, his snow-white clothes and black hair fluttering in the wind. His long and narrow almond-shaped eyes hid a light that did not hurt anyone, but had the aura of being in control of the entire situation. When he was silent, the slightly drooping corners of his eyes perfectly dispelled the coldness, showing a lazy and noble air. From Hellion Vivian's angle, she could only see a pair of long, slender, and powerful legs. His white robe and green shirt outlined his perfect waistline, making him look otherworldly and handsome. Walking beside him was a person whose temperament was the complete opposite of his. That person's collar was unbuttoned, and he had his outer shirt draped over his shoulder with one hand. He walked without the slightest scruple, as if he was certain that this academy would not do anything to him. That person seemed to say something to the man. The man suddenly raised his head, revealing a pair of long and narrow eyes. Although they were beautiful, the corners of his eyes were unusually sharp, as mysterious as an ancient pool. Hellion Vivian was stunned. She quickly turned her body like a cat and covered half of her face with her hands. She moved to the left without a trace. "Woman, why are you hiding?" Yuan Ming's muffled voice came over. Hellion Vivian pressed down on the ancient book and made a shu gesture. Her bright eyes slightly narrowed. That was close. She was almost discovered. That man was able to sense it from such a distance. He was really abnormal. No wonder she felt that the surrounding atmosphere was not right. Especially on her right, there was actually a space that was empty. Just a moment ago, those ladies from noble families were so strenuously squeezed together. When did they ever become so modest and even bashfully stood to the side? That lovable appearance made Wei Wei truly puzzled. Now, she completely understood. It was all because of the appearance of these two men, which caused a chain reaction. Sure enough, femme fatale, Hellion Vivian sighed in her heart. She chose a hidden place and continued to watch the show. All the young ladies looked at the two handsome men in front of them with shining eyes. They were puzzled as to who they were. How come they had never seen them in the usual tests? They wished they could have the servant girls at their side go and inquire about them. Which family's young masters were they? "Ah, Ju, what are you looking at?" Nangong Lai came over and excitedly said, "Don't tell me you found the kitten?" "Nope." Beligaju withdrew his supercilious gaze. The corners of his mouth slightly hooked up. He was bewitchingly cold and wanton. But, soon, little bald head listened to the conversation between these two people. He was very conflicted. He did not know whether he should make a move or not. He could only hold the meat bun in his mouth. His thick black eyebrows wrinkled into a caterpillar. Finally, he shouted like a tiger, "Master, I don't want to fight anymore. Hurry up and give me back my lunch." As the little baldy shouted, he turned around and ran inside like a little mouse. Everyone was stunned again. What was this situation? The first test was so inexplicably passed? When the stone door was fully opened, on the steps, a man wearing a scholar's hat lowered his head. His face was full of disapproval as he looked at the little bald person. He was more than 30 years old, but he did not look old at all. Instead, his sleeves were clean, gentle, and refined. When everyone came in, they saw this scene. No one could tell the man's identity. They thought it was the second test, so they all put on a fighting posture. The man's smiling gaze swept over them inch by inch. His voice was cool to the bone. "From today onwards, you are White Academy students. This semester is half a year. In this half a year, you all had better behave. You can do bad things, but you can't let me know. Chi, who do you think you are? In the crowd, a young master from an aristocratic family impatiently muttered a sentence. The man's gaze fell on him. His faint smile did not change. It seems that this young master is very dissatisfied with me. Then you can get lost. What did you say? That young master jumped up. His face turned red and white. Do you know who my father is? You crafty. Not waiting for him to finish speaking, the man snapped his fingers. Suddenly, two black shadows appeared beside the young master. The man looked at his frightened face. His expression was indifferent. Send him back to the residence. Tell General Zhang that young Master Zhang was born noble. I, Tu Su Feng, cannot teach him. Yes, Principal. In the blink of an eye, that young master from an aristocratic family was brought out of the courtyard. Little bald head pulled on Tu Su Feng's sleeve. He already pointed to the left and pouted his mouth. Tu Su Feng's gaze followed over. His long and narrow eyes narrowed. He suddenly laughed, looking extremely happy. Okay, the fun ends here. This year's new students gave me a big surprise. Next, I welcome you all to White Academy. As he spoke, he slightly opened his arms. The surrounding trees seemed to have a reaction. One after another, they swayed. Large flower petals floated down from above. Dozens of black shadows jumped out from inside the house and stood on top of the tree branches. Their figures were graceful, and their atmosphere was overflowing. What followed was the spring water that burst out from the ground. As if it was guided, it rushed up to the sky and transformed into all kinds of flower shapes. This was the mysterious part of White Academy. She had finally found a place where she could contend with the influential officials. She believed that as long as she could stay here, she would definitely become even stronger. Vaguely, Helly and Vivian seemed to feel as if there was something in the depths of her arteries that was quietly ignited, slowly boiling up. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.